former homeless veteran on trial. When Judge hears his name, entire courtroom stands. The grey-haired man in worn-out clothes was being led to the defendant's bench when his tired eyes took in a place he never imagined he'd enter. The handcuffs clinked with every step as he walked through the crowded courtroom. Then Judge Daniel Howard Thompson picked up the case file and read aloud. The defendant, Richard Turner Johnson. Please rise for the start of the hearing. The name echoed through the hall, and for a moment, silence filled the room. The 65-year-old magistrate froze upon hearing that full name. His eyes lifted from the documents and locked onto the man before him. Richard Turner Johnson, the judge repeated, his voice trembling. Yes, Your Honor. The defendant answered with dignity, despite wearing a faded denim shirt and a beige cardigan that had seen better days. At that moment, Prosecutor Michael Roberts, a middle-aged man who had attended hearings for over 20 years, slowly rose from his seat. His eyes were wide, as if he'd seen a ghost. This can't be, he murmured, drawing the attention of everyone present. Public Defender Brian Parker, a young lawyer still struggling to establish himself, looked confused between his client and the prosecutor. Richard remained standing, his posture straight despite the weight of years and hardship. Is there a problem, Mr. Roberts? The judge asked, though his own voice betrayed growing emotion. The prosecutor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a few steps toward the defendant's bench, studying the weathered face of the man accused of trespassing and disturbing the peace. Richard Turner Johnson, born March 15, 1958, the prosecutor asked, completely ignoring courtroom protocol. That's correct, Richard confirmed, unsure where this was going. The court clerk, Mrs. Jenkins, a white-haired woman who had worked there for over 30 years, let out an audible gasp. She had stopped typing and now stared fixedly at the defendant. My God, she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. Attorney Brian finally intervened. Your Honor, I request clarification on what's happening. My client is entitled to a fair trial and... Silence, the judge said, but his voice lacked authority. There was something different in his tone, a reverence rarely seen in courtrooms. Daniel Howard Thompson removed his glasses and nervously wiped them. His mind traveled back decades, to a time he thought he'd left behind. Memories of his youth when he was still a soldier resurfaced with startling clarity. Sergeant Richard? The judge asked almost in a whisper. The defendant straightened even further. For a moment, the years of living on the streets seemed to fade, and a spark of the soldier he once was shone in his weary eyes. Corporal Daniel, Richard replied, immediately recognizing the man behind the robe. It's been a long time. The impact of that recognition rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Michael Roberts, the prosecutor, closed his eyes and shook his head slowly, as if unable to believe what he was witnessing. It can't be, he repeated. The hero of Alaska is being tried as a homeless man. The murmurs that followed among those in the courtroom were cut short by the judge's firm gavel strike. Daniel Howard Thompson tried to regain control, but his hands visibly shook. Order in the court, he said, though his own voice revealed the emotional storm inside him. Brian Parker looked at his client with an entirely new expression. He had taken the case the day before, like so many others that came through public defense. A homeless man accused of trespassing on abandoned property and fighting with security guards. Nothing that suggested the complexity now unfolding. Richard, the lawyer said quietly, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? The defendant replied, his gaze fixed on the judge. That I used to be somebody? That doesn't change the fact that today I'm just a man with no home, no family, nothing. Mrs. Jenkins rose from her desk. Her eyes were moist as she looked at the man who had once graced newspaper headlines, decorated for bravery in operations that saved lives in conflict zones. How did you end up like this? She asked, completely forgetting her position in the courtroom. Judge Daniel Howard motioned for her to sit down, but he himself was struggling with his emotions. Memories of when he had met Richard were becoming clearer. It was 1982 and Daniel was just a young soldier newly enlisted in the army. Richard had been his instructor, the sergeant responsible for shaping him from an inexperienced boy into a disciplined soldier. More than that, he had been a father figure to many lost and directionless young men who arrived at the barracks. "Sergeant Richard saved my life," Daniel Howard said, addressing everyone in the courtroom. "And not just once." Prosecutor Michael Roberts nodded gravely. He knew the story too because his older brother had served under Richard's command during a rescue operation on the Canadian border in 1985. "My brother told me about you," Michael said to the defendant. "About how you carried 3 wounded soldiers over 10 miles through the jungle alone so they could get medical attention." Richard lowered his eyes. Those memories belonged to a man he felt he had stopped being long ago. The weight of the years that followed, the losses, the disappointments, all of it had built a wall between who he was and who he had become. "That was a long time ago," he murmured. "Now I'm just a burden to society." "Never," came a firm voice from the gallery. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was a man around 50 years old, rising slowly. His military bearing was unmistakable, even in civilian clothes. "Colonel William Matthews," he introduced himself to the judge. "I came to observe this hearing because my brother asked me to look into cases involving homeless individuals. But I never imagined I'd find Sergeant Richard here." The colonel descended a few steps from the gallery as far as protocol allowed. "Sergeant, you saved my life in 1987 during the operation in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was just a green lieutenant who had gotten lost in the jungle with 3 soldiers under my command. If it weren't for you, you were my responsibility." Richard interrupted. "All of you were. And now we're responsible for you," the colonel declared firmly. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing, Judge Daniel Howard had to pause. He removed his robe and hung it on the chair, a gesture that surprised everyone present. Without the solemnity of his attire, he stepped down from the bench and walked over to where Richard stood. "Corporal Daniel requesting permission to speak with the sergeant," he said, his posture reminiscent of their barracks days. Richard smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. It was a sad smile, but genuine. "Permission granted, Corporal." "What happened to you, Sergeant? How did you end up here?" The question echoed through the courtroom in absolute silence. Richard looked around, seeing faces staring back at him with a mix of curiosity, compassion, and respect. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "Life happened, Corporal Daniel," he finally replied. "Life happened." The attorney Michael Roberts watched the scene with growing understanding. He was beginning to realize he was facing something far greater than a simple trespassing case. This man carried a story that could completely change the course of the trial. "Your Honor," he interjected respectfully, "I request a recess so I may properly consult with my client and reassess our defense." "Denied," Daniel Howard Thompson responded immediately. "I want to hear his story now, we all do." The prosecutor, Robert Wilson, approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to move to dismiss the charges," he said quietly, though audible to all. "Not yet, Mr. Wilson," replied the judge. "First, I want to understand how the hero who taught me to be an honorable man ended up in this situation." Richard sighed deeply. He'd known this moment would come eventually. For years on the streets, he'd managed to keep his identity secret, living as a ghost of who he'd once been. But now, facing these familiar faces and their unexpected reverence, there was no escaping his past. "Everything started falling apart in 1995, he began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I'd retired from the army after 35 years of service. I had a wonderful wife, Mary Helen, and 2 children, Charles Edward and Anna Beatrice." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the staff who normally moved through the halls had stopped to listen. Mary Helen taught at our neighborhood's public school in the suburbs of San Diego. Our children were growing up. Charles Edward wanted to follow his father's military career, and Anna Beatrice dreamed of becoming a doctor. Richard paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Between my military pension and Mary Helen's salary, we lived comfortably. We weren't rich, but we owned our home. The children were in school, and I'd started working as an instructor at a self-defense academy." Mrs. Jenkins discreetly wiped away a tear. She could see where this story was heading, and her heart already ached for the pain to come. In 1997, Mary Helen began feeling exhausted. We thought it was overwork, but she insisted on getting tests, Richard continued, his voice beginning to waver. Cancer, whispered Colonel Armstrong, who'd remained standing throughout the account. Ovarian cancer, Richard confirmed. Advanced stage. The doctor said she might have 2 years left with luck. Judge Daniel Howard Thompson sat back in his chair, but kept his full attention on his former instructor's story. We sold everything we had to pay for treatments, Richard went on. The house, the car, even the medals and commendations I'd received during my military career. Mary Helen fought bravely for 3 years, but he couldn't finish the sentence. The courtroom's silence was deafening. In 2000 she passed, he said at last, and took our family's light with her. Attorney Michael stepped closer to his client and placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture but filled with compassion. The children, Daniel Howard Thompson asked gently. Charles Edward blamed me and the army for not having enough resources for better treatment. He said military life had kept us poor, and that if I'd chosen a civilian career, we could have given his mother better medical care. Richard wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Anna Beatrice, who was in medical school, started working, day and night to support herself and help at home. The pressure was so great that she ended up dropping out of college in her 5th semester. And you? Asked Prosecutor Michael, his voice heavy with emotion. I blamed myself for everything, for not being able to save my wife like I had saved so many soldiers on missions, for not having enough money for the best treatments, for watching my children destroy themselves with grief and anger. Colonel William descended a few more steps, moving closer to the defendant's bench. Sergeant, the loss of a wife doesn't justify— It wasn't just that, Colonel, Richard interrupted. Charles Edward got involved with the wrong crowd. He started using drugs to escape the pain. Anna Beatrice married a violent man who forbade her from having any contact with me. My God, murmured Mrs. Jenkins. In 2003, Charles Edward was arrested for theft. He had stolen a cell phone to get money for drugs. When I went to visit him in prison, he told me he never wanted to see me again, that I had failed as a father, just as I had failed as a husband. The courtroom was completely silent. Some of the people in the gallery had tears in their eyes. Anna Beatrice moved to another city with her husband. The last time I spoke to her was in 2004, over the phone. She asked me not to call again because her husband would get violent when he found out she was talking to me. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. I lost my job at the academy because I started drinking. I couldn't teach anyone when. I was completely lost myself. I lost the small house I had rented after we sold ours. I started crashing at the homes of some of my old army buddies. But they tried to help, Daniel pointed out. They did try, but I was a pit of bitterness and self-destruction. I was too ashamed to accept help, too proud to admit I needed psychological support. The lawyer Brian finally understood the complexity of the case he had taken on. This wasn't just any homeless man. This was someone who had fallen from a position of honor and respect into the deepest abyss of society. When did you start living on the streets? He asked. In 2006, I was staying with an old army buddy, Sergeant Joseph Lewis. But my presence was causing problems in his marriage. His wife, understandably, couldn't stand having a depressed alcoholic living in her house anymore. Richard looked directly at the judge. Joseph Lewis tried to convince me to get professional help to check into a rehab facility, but I was convinced I didn't deserve to be saved. I thought it was a fair punishment for failing my family. So you chose the streets, said Colonel William, not as a judgment but with understanding. I chose the streets because there, I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I didn't have to disappoint anyone else because there was no one left to disappoint. Prosecutor Michael Roberts walked over to his desk and picked up the case files. He flipped through them quickly, rereading the charges against Richard. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest and assault, he read aloud. Sergeant, what exactly happened early last Thursday morning? Richard sighed. The question brought him back to the present, to the circumstances that had led him to this courtroom. I was sleeping on what I thought was an abandoned lot. It was an old half-demolished building, and I had made a small shelter out of cardboard and old tarps in one corner. And the security guards? Asked the judge. They showed up around 3 in the morning, said it was private property and I had to leave immediately. I gathered my things and was leaving, but one of them started shoving me and yelling. The lawyer Brian checked his notes. According to the police report, there was physical aggression. There was, admitted Richard, when one of the security guards shoved me hard. I reacted on instinct. Years of military training don't just fade away, even after decades on the streets. Was the guard hurt? Asked Daniel. I immobilized him and left him on the ground. I didn't hurt him, just used a restraint technique I learned in the army, but his pride was wounded, and he called for backup. Colonel William shook his head. And when the backup arrived, 4 armed guards with batons showed up. They surrounded me and started hitting me. That's when I lost control and fought back. Richard showed some still visible bruises on his arms. According to witnesses, you took on 4 armed men. Alone, said Prosecutor Michael, consulting another document. I didn't want to hurt anyone, I just wanted them to stop hitting me. But when you're fighting for survival, military training takes over. Mrs. Jenkins looked indignantly at the papers on her desk. 4 men against a 65-year-old man, that's cowardice. The police were called by the guards, Richard continued. When they arrived, they found me standing in the middle of 4 men lying on the ground. Of course, it looked like I was the aggressor. Judge Daniel stood again. And you didn't explain who you were? Didn't tell them about your military career? Why would I? Richard replied bitterly. Who would believe a dirty, ragged, homeless man was once decorated for bravery? Who would care about who I was when they only saw what I'd become? The silence that followed was broken by a voice from the gallery. I care. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was a woman around 40, with brown hair and eyes red from crying. She stood, visibly trembling. Who are you? Asked the judge. My name is Sarah Johnson, she said, her voice choked. I'm Sergeant Richard's daughter. The impact was instant. Richard turned completely, his eyes widening as he saw the woman he didn't immediately recognize. Anna Beatrice? He whispered. It's Sarah now, she replied, descending the gallery steps. I changed my name when I married, but changed it back after my divorce. Richard couldn't move. It had been 19 years since he'd seen his daughter, and now she was here in court at the most humiliating moment of his life. How did you know I was here? He asked. I work as a social worker here at the courthouse. Sarah answered, tears streaming freely. When I saw your name on today's hearing list, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a coincidence, but I had to check. Attorney Brian watched the reunion with growing emotion. This case had turned into something far beyond a simple criminal hearing. Sarah, Richard said, trying to step closer, but the handcuffs restricted his movement. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry too, Dad, she replied, closing the distance between them. I'm sorry I believed you didn't love us, that I let that man convince me you were a failure. Judge Daniel motioned to the bailiff. Remove Mr. Johnson's handcuffs immediately. Your Honor, that's against protocol, the bailiff protested. I'll take responsibility, Daniel declared. This man is no common criminal. As soon as the cuffs were off, Richard embraced his daughter for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Both wept openly, and not a soul in the courtroom was unmoved by the scene. I looked for you, Sarah whispered in her father's ear. I searched for years, but you'd just vanished. I thought it was better that way, Richard answered. I thought you'd be happier without me. Colonel William approached the two. Sergeant, where is your son, Charles Edward? Richard stepped slightly away from Sarah to respond. I don't know. The last I heard of him was when he got out of prison in 2008. I never saw him again. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at the colonel. Charles Edward passed away 3 years ago, she said softly. Overdose. I tried to help him once I got away from my ex-husband, but he was too broken. The news hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He staggered and had to lean on the lawyer's table. My son, he murmured. My boy. He died saying he wanted to ask his father for forgiveness, Sarah continued, but he didn't know where to find you. The entire courtroom watched this family tragedy unfold before their eyes. Prosecutor Michael had completely set aside the case files and observed the scene with deep emotion. Sarah, said Richard, still processing the news, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why come today? Because I only found out you were alive 6 months ago, she replied. A social worker from another city told me there was someone on the streets who matched my father's description, but when I went looking, you had disappeared again. I move around constantly, Richard explained. Life on the streets is like that. When a place gets dangerous or they chase us out, we move on. Judge Daniel Howard resumed his position, but his expression was entirely different now. Sarah, you said you work as a social worker here at the courthouse? Yes, Your Honor. I work with people in socially vulnerable situations. Ironically, I spend my days trying to help people like my father, not knowing he himself needed my help. And what is your professional assessment of your father's situation? Sarah looked at Richard with a mix of love and professional concern. My father suffers from untreated severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, related to both military service and family losses, and alcohol dependence as a coping mechanism. He needs psychiatric treatment and social support, not prison. Prosecutor Michael stood up. Your Honor, in light of the information presented, I would like to formally withdraw all charges against Mr. Richard Turner Johnson. Not yet, Mr. Roberts, said the judge. I want to understand the full situation better before making any decisions. He turned to Sarah. As a social worker, what would your rehabilitation plan for your father look like? First, voluntary hospitalization for alcohol detox and psychiatric stabilization. Then ongoing psychological support, social assistance for documentation and benefits, and a gradual reintegration program. Richard listened to his daughter's plan with a mix of hope and skepticism. Sarah, I've tried to quit drinking so many times I never could. Dad, this time you won't be trying alone, she said firmly. This time you'll have support. Colonel William stepped forward again. Sergeant, if I may, I'd like to contribute to this rehabilitation plan. How so, Colonel? The military has assistance programs for veterans. I know you retired long ago, but your situation is special. Your service to the country deserves recognition and support. Mrs. Jenkins rose from her seat. I'd also like to help, she said. My husband is an Air Force veteran. I know how hard the transition to civilian life can be, especially with personal tragedies. Lawyer Bryan watched in admiration as the case transformed into a spontaneous support network. Mr. Parker, said the judge, as a public defender, what is your stance on this case? Your Honor, this case perfectly illustrates the structural problems in our society regarding military veterans and the homeless. My client is not a criminal. He is a victim of circumstances that the system failed to support. And what is your recommendation? Dismissal of the case under the condition of treatment and social support. This man needs help, not punishment. Judge Daniel Howard Thompson sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on everything he had heard. Finally, he spoke. This court will recess for 1 hour. I want to speak individually with a few people before making a decision. During the break, Sarah remained by her father's side. They sat together on one of the courtroom benches, trying to bridge nearly 2 decades of separation. Sarah, I want you to know there wasn't a single day I didn't think about you and Charles Edward, said Richard. I know, Dad. Deep in my heart, I always knew. But the pain was so great that it was easier to blame you than to accept that sometimes life is just unfair. Tell me about your life, he asked. Did you marry, have children? Sarah sighed. I married at 25 to a man who seemed to be everything I thought I needed. Stable, financially successful, determined. But he was also controlling and abusive. Did he hit you? Not physically, but emotionally. He isolated me from all my friends, forbade me from working at first, made me feel like I was incapable and worthless without him. Richard clenched his fists. If I had known, what would you have done, Dad? You were fighting your own demons. And I chose to believe him when he said my family was no good. How long were you with him? 12 years. I only managed to leave when I got my degree in social work at 37. The program taught me about abusive relationships and gave me the strength to break free. Richard shook his head. We were both victims of our own fears. Yes, but now we have a second chance, Dad. A chance to build something new from the wreckage of what we lost. At that moment, Colonel William Matthews approached them. Sergeant, I spoke with some colleagues during the recess. We have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? A full rehabilitation program, but not at a regular clinic. We have a support center for veterans in rural Colorado. It's a place where former military in situations like yours help each other. Sarah immediately perked up. How does this center work? It's a therapeutic farm, the colonel explained. Residents work in agriculture, animal care, construction, and maintenance. They receive psychological and medical support, but also regain a sense of purpose and community. And could I visit him? Sarah asked. Of course. In fact, we encourage family involvement in the recovery process. Richard looked at his daughter, then at the colonel. Why are you doing this for me? I'm just a failure who let everyone down. Dad, stop that, Sarah said firmly. You're not a failure. You're a man who endured enormous tragedies without the right support. The sergeant is right to question our motives, the colonel said. I'll be honest, part of our motivation is selfish. How so? We know there are thousands of veterans across the country facing problems like yours. Many end up on the streets, others become alcoholics or take their own lives. Helping you isn't just about you, it's about proving that it's possible to reclaim dignity and purpose even after hitting rock bottom. Richard absorbed these words in silence. You want to make me an example? We want to make you proof that it's never too late to start over, the colonel corrected. But only if you want to. The choice is yours. At that moment, the bailiff announced the return to session. Everyone resumed their positions in the courtroom. Judge Daniel Howard Thompson took his seat with a solemn expression. After hearing all testimonies and carefully considering the circumstances of this case, I have reached a decision. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Mr. Richard Turner Johnson, this court recognizes that your actions in the early hours of last Thursday were motivated by self-defense and survival instinct. Richard took a deep breath. However, the judge continued, this court also recognizes that you need help, not punishment. Daniel Howard looked directly at Richard. Therefore, I will conditionally suspend these proceedings upon the fulfillment of the following conditions. First, immediate voluntary admission for treatment of alcohol dependency and psychiatric monitoring. I accept, Richard said immediately. Second, participation in the rehabilitation program for veterans proposed by Colonel William Matthews, for as long as the professionals deem necessary. I accept. Third, monthly check-ins with social worker Sarah Johnson, your daughter, to monitor progress and provide family support. Sarah smiled through her tears. And fourth, the judge continued, once you successfully complete the rehabilitation program, this court will consider offering you a position as a consultant in the legal assistance program for the homeless. Your Honor? Richard asked, confused. Sergeant, your experience on the streets combined with your military leadership could be invaluable in helping others in similar situations, if you accept, of course. Richard looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. I accept all the conditions, Your Honor. Excellent, said the judge. Dr. Michael, does the prosecution agree with this resolution? Fully, Your Honor, and I'd like to add that I will personally monitor Mr. Richard's progress. Dr. Bryan? The defense is completely satisfied with the resolution, Your Honor. The judge struck the gavel. Case conditionally suspended. Mr. Richard, you are free to begin your treatment immediately. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Colonel Williams stood and saluted Richard. Immediately, all other military personnel present in the courtroom did the same. Sergeant Richard Turner Johnson, the colonel said loudly, on behalf of the men and women who served under your command and the lives you saved, we salute. You, dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Judge Daniel Howard stood and also saluted. Then everyone in the courtroom rose in a spontaneous show of respect that left Richard deeply moved. I don't deserve this, he whispered. You always have, Dad, Sarah said, hugging him again. It just took a long time for the right people to find you. Mrs. Jenkins approached with a folder in her hands. Sergeant, I made some calls during the recess. Colonel Williams' Rehabilitation Center has an opening immediately, and I managed to expedite the paperwork you'll need. Paperwork? Your ID, social security card, voter registration, military records, she explained. Everything you lost during those years on the streets will restore your official identity. Attorney Bryan approached with a paper in hand. Sergeant, I prepared a power of attorney so your daughter can legally represent you during the document and benefits recovery process. If you agree, of course. Sarah has my complete trust, replied Richard. Excellent, and I'll oversee the entire process pro bono. It's an honor to defend a hero. Prosecutor Michael joined the group. Sergeant, I have a personal question, if I may. Go ahead. What kept you alive all these years on the streets? What stopped you from giving up completely? Richard thought for a moment before answering. Honestly? Military discipline. Even in the worst moments, even when I wanted to give up on everything, something inside me refused to quit entirely. It was like I was still a soldier on a mission, even if I didn't know what the mission was. And now do you know what it is? Asked Sarah. Now I do, he replied, looking at her. My mission is to recover, rebuild my life, and maybe, God willing, help other veterans going through what I went through. Colonel Williams smiled. That's the attitude of a true leader, Sergeant. At that moment, a young journalist who had been in the gallery approached the group. Excuse me, I'm Raphael Simmons from the local Gazette. May I ask a few questions? About what happened here today? No interviews for now, Sarah interjected protectively. Sarah, let him speak, said Richard. Raphael, what's your question? Mr. Johnson, how do you feel knowing your story could inspire other veterans in similar situations? Richard looked around the courtroom, seeing all the faces watching him expectantly. I feel responsible, he finally answered. If my story can prevent another veteran from going through what I did, then maybe all this suffering was worth it. And what's your message to other veterans who might be watching or reading about your story? That it's never too late to ask for help. That our military strength also includes the courage to admit weakness and seek support. And that once a soldier, always a soldier. But soldiers fight together, not alone. The journalist carefully noted Richard's words. One last question. What do you hope for most in this new chapter of your life? Richard looked at Sarah and smiled. I hope to have the chance to be a father again. And who knows, God willing, maybe even a grandfather someday. Sarah squeezed her father's hand. Dad, there's something I haven't told you yet. What is it? I'm engaged. We're getting married next year. And I'd love for you to walk me down the aisle. Richard felt tears streaming down his face. It would be the greatest honor of my life. And there's one more thing, Sarah continued. Paul, my fiancé, is also a veteran. When I tell him your story, I'm sure he'll want to meet you. Colonel William watched the scene with satisfaction. Sergeant, when you're ready, I'd like to introduce you to some other veterans who've been through similar situations. I'm sure you all have much to share with each other. It would be my pleasure, Colonel. Judge Daniel approached the group one last time. Sergeant, before we officially conclude this hearing, I'd like to say something personal. Go ahead, Corporal Daniel. You didn't just teach me how to be a soldier 40 years ago. You taught me how to be a man of honor and integrity. Seeing you in this situation, and then witnessing your courage to start over reminds me why I chose a career in law. Daniel, you've become an admirable man. I always knew you'd go far. And now we'll move forward together, Sergeant. As veterans, as men who face challenges, and as people who believe in the possibility of redemption. Mrs. Jenkins approached with more papers. Sergeant, I've scheduled your admission for tomorrow morning. Colonel Williams' Center can take you in next week as soon as you complete the initial detox phase. And I'll be there with you through the whole process, Sarah promised. Sarah, you have your own life to tend to. You don't have to drop everything for me. Dad, 19 years without you was far too long. I won't waste a single day more of our second chance. The attorney Bryan tucked his papers back into the folder. Sergeant, I'll monitor your progress and be available for any legal questions that come up. And when you're ready to work as a consultant here at the courthouse, we'll be ready to welcome you. Thank you, Mr. Bryan, for believing in me when even I didn't believe in myself. That's what public defense is for, Sergeant, to make sure everyone gets a chance to defend themselves and start over. Prosecutor Michael said goodbye with a firm handshake. Sergeant, My brother would be so proud to know we finally got to repay even a little of what you did for him and so many others. Your brother was a good soldier. I hope he's doing well. He is. He's a retired colonel now, and when I tell him this story, I'm sure he'll want to visit you." As the courtroom emptied, Richard stayed behind for a few moments alone with Sarah. They sat together on the empty benches, taking in everything that had happened. "Sarah, I'm so afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of what, Dad?" "Afraid of disappointing you again. Afraid I won't fully recover. Afraid you'll realize I'm not really the hero these people think I am." Sarah took her father's hands in hers. "Dad, you're already my hero. Not for what you did in the army, but for surviving everything you've been through. For not giving up completely, even when it all seemed lost. But what if I relapse? What if I can't stop drinking? What if—" "Dad," Sarah interrupted firmly, "what if you do? What if this time, with all this support, you finally recover for good?" Richard looked into his daughter's eyes and saw a determination that reminded him of Mary Helen. "You're just like your mother," he said fondly. "Mom always said you were the strongest man she ever knew, that if anyone could overcome anything, it was you." "Your mother said that?" "She did. Even in her last days when she was very sick, she made me promise I'd never stop believing in you." Richard felt a deep emotion wash over him. "I broke that promise for a long time, Dad, but today I renew it. I believe in you." "Thank you, my girl. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." They sat there a few minutes longer silent, feeling the weight and the hope of that singular moment. "Dad," Sarah finally said, "I have a confession." "Go ahead." "I didn't come to this hearing by chance. When I saw your name on the list, I looked into the charges against you. And I was furious. Furious at a system that criminalizes vulnerable people. Furious at myself for not finding you sooner. Furious at the world for letting things get this bad for you. Sarah, I came here determined to fight for you, even if you didn't want me to. Because I realized all these years, I'd been fighting against you instead of for you." Richard hugged his daughter once more. "Now we'll fight together," he said. "For both of us, for Charles Edward we lost, and for all the other veterans who need to know they're not alone." "Together," Sarah agreed. When they finally left the courthouse, Richard stopped at the door and looked back one last time. That place had been the setting of his greatest humiliation, but also of his greatest redemption. "Ready, Dad?" asked Sarah. "Ready," he replied, and together they walked toward the future. The next day, Richard checked into the detox center. Sarah accompanied him through the entire admission process, ensuring he felt supported from the very beginning. "Mr. Johnson," said the attending physician, Dr. Christine Adams, "I've reviewed your records, and I want you to know we're honored to have you here." "Thank you, Doctor, but I'd like to be treated like any other patient." "Of course, but we also want you to know we understand the specific complexities of your case. Military veterans face unique challenges when reintegrating into civilian life. During the first weeks of treatment, Richard faced some very difficult moments. Alcohol withdrawal brought not only physical symptoms, but also a painful mental clarity about everything he had lost. Sarah visited him every allowed day, bringing letters of support from people who had heard his story. Colonel William also visited him regularly, sharing stories of other veterans who had successfully recovered. "Sergeant," the colonel said during one of these visits, "how are you feeling?" "Sometimes I feel hopeful, other times I feel lost," Richard answered honestly. "But for the first time in years I feel possible. Yes, I feel like it's possible for me to become someone my daughter can be proud of again, someone Mary Helen would have been proud to love." "Sergeant, I can assure you your wife was always proud of you. Love doesn't disappear because of hardships." After 6 weeks of intensive treatment, Richard was ready for the next phase, the therapeutic farm for veterans. The place was exactly as Colonel William had described, a spacious rural property with simple yet comfortable homes, farming areas, livestock and workshops for carpentry and mechanics. "Welcome to Veterans Retreat," said the coordinator, retired Major Joseph Charles Peterson. "Here we believe work and community are just as important as therapy." Richard was introduced to the other residents. There were former soldiers, sailors, and airmen, all facing different kinds of post-service challenges. "This is Sergeant Richard," Major Joseph introduced. "He has a long history of service and will contribute greatly to our community." "I don't want any special treatment," Richard said. "I just want to work and recover like everyone else." "Here, everyone works and everyone recovers," replied one of the residents, retired Corporal Anthony Stone. "But we also all help each other." The farm's routine was rigorous but comforting. Richard woke at 5 in the morning, joined in group exercises, worked in the garden during the morning, attended therapy sessions in the afternoon, and ended the day with recreational and social activities. "How are you adjusting?" Sarah asked during one of her weekly visits. "Better than I expected," Richard replied. "It's strange, but I missed military discipline all these years. Here I have structure again." "And how are the other veterans?" "Good people facing problems like mine. Some lost their families, others developed addictions, some have severe PTSD, but everyone's trying to recover." Sarah noticed her father looked physically stronger. The farm work, combined with regular meals and sobriety, had significantly improved his appearance. "Dad, you look 10 years younger." "I feel renewed, Sarah. For the first time in years, I wake up knowing what my purpose for the day is." "And what is it?" "Taking care of the garden, helping with facility maintenance, participating in group therapy sessions, and assisting the newer comrades who arrive here as lost as I was." "You're helping other veterans?" "Yes. Major Joseph Charles discovered I have a knack for talking to newcomers. Many arrive here angry, resistant to treatment. When they see I've been through similar things and am recovering, it becomes easier for them to accept help." Sarah smiled. "You're starting to work as a counselor again." "In a way, yes. And you know what's most rewarding? When one of these men takes their first real step toward recovery." Over the following months, Richard became a central figure in the farm's community. His military experience, combined with his personal journey of downfall and recovery, made him especially effective in helping other veterans. "Sergeant Richard," said a young former soldier named Robert during a group therapy session, "how did you manage to forgive yourself?" "I'm still learning, Robert," Richard answered honestly. "But I realized hating myself didn't honor my wife's memory or help my daughter. Self-forgiveness is a daily process." "But how? How do you actually do it?" "First, by accepting that we're human and humans make mistakes. Second, by taking responsibility for our mistakes without destroying ourselves over them. And third, by working every day to be a better version of ourselves." The farm's psychologist, Dr. Martin Brooks, observed these interactions with professional interest. "Richard," he said after a session, "have you ever considered officially training as a veterans counselor?" "Just what do you mean, doctor?" "There are rehabilitation counselor training programs. With your military experience and personal journey, you'd be an exceptional counselor." "But I don't have formal education for that." "Life experience is just as valuable as formal education, especially in this field, and you can always supplement it with specific courses." Richard considered the suggestion. "I'll think about it." When Sarah visited him the following week, he told her about the conversation with the psychologist. "Dad, I think it's a wonderful idea," she said excitedly. "You do? But do I really have what it takes to counsel others when I'm still recovering myself?" "Dad, that's exactly why you'd be a good counselor. You understand what they're going through because you've been there." "What if I'm not good at it? What if you're exceptional?" "Dad, stop always assuming the worst." Sarah was right. Richard had developed the habit of always expecting the worst as a way to protect himself from disappointment. But now, for the first time in years, he began to consider the possibility that things might work out. After 8 months at the therapeutic farm, Richard had completely transformed. Not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. He was strong, sober, and, for the first time in decades, hopeful. "Sergeant," said Major Joseph Charles, "it's time we talked about your next steps. I can stay longer if needed." "To us? No, you're ready for the next phase. The question is, what do you want to do?" Richard had thought a lot about that question in recent weeks. "I'd like to train as a veterans counselor and work helping other men in situations Like what I faced. Excellent, I've already spoken to Colonel William about this. They have a training program that could start next month. And where would I live? I can't impose this on Sarah. Actually, said Major Joseph Charles with a smile, we have a proposal for you. How would you feel about becoming the resident supervisor here at the farm? How do you mean? Would you live here permanently but as a staff member, not a patient? You'd be responsible for supervising new residents and coordinating integration activities. The proposal was perfect. Richard could stay in the community that had become his family, but now with an active and productive role. I accept, he said without hesitation. When Sarah heard about the decision, she was overjoyed. Dad, this is perfect for you. You've always been a natural leader. And the best part is, I'll be close enough for you to visit regularly. But far enough for you to have your own life. Speaking of your own life, Sarah said with a special smile, Paul and I moved up the wedding. Moved it up? Why? Because we want you to have enough time to get to know him well before the ceremony. And because, well, we found out we're having a baby. Richard was completely stunned. A baby? I'm going to be a grandfather. Yes, Dad, you're going to be a grandfather. Tears streamed down Richard's face as he hugged his daughter. Mary Helen would be so happy, he whispered. She is happy, Dad. Wherever she is, she's happy. When did you find out? 2 weeks ago. That's why we moved the wedding to next month. We want to get married before I start showing too much. And does Paul know about my past? He knows everything, and he said it would be an honor to have a war hero as a father-in-law, and that our son would be very lucky to have you as his grandfather. Richard could hardly believe the turn his life had taken. In less than a year, he had gone from the streets to becoming a respected veterans counselor, rebuilt his relationship with his daughter, and now he was going to be a grandfather. Sarah, I need to ask you something. Anything, Dad. When the baby is born, whether it's a boy or a girl, I'd like the middle name to be Charles Edward, in memory of your brother. Sarah began to cry. Dad, Paul and I had already decided that if it's a boy, he'll be Paul Charles Edward. If it's a girl, she'll be Mary Charles Edward Helen. Mary Helen. After your mother. After our mother. After our family that's rebuilding. On Sarah's wedding day, Richard wore his full military uniform. Colonel William had managed to recover all his medals, which now shone proudly on his chest. Dad, you look handsome, Sarah said, radiant in her wedding dress. You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, he replied. Your mother would be so proud. She's here with us, Dad. I feel her presence. When it was time to walk down the aisle, Richard offered his arm to his daughter. Ready, my princess? Ready, my hero. They walked together through the church nave with the guests rising in respect. Many of those present were veterans Richard had helped at the therapeutic farm, along with all the professionals who had been part of his recovery. Who gives this woman in marriage? The priest asked. I, Richard Turner Johnson, veteran of the United States Armed Forces and proud father of this extraordinary woman, give her in marriage to Paul Robert Smith with the blessing of her mother Mary Helen, who watches over us from heaven. When Richard placed Sarah's hand in Paul's, he whispered, Take good care of her. She's the most precious thing I have in this world. I promise, Mr. Johnson, Paul replied sincerely. During the reception, many people approached Richard to congratulate him and share how his story had inspired their own lives. Sergeant, said a young veteran, your story stopped me from giving up completely. When I heard that the hero of Alaska had hit rock bottom and managed to recover, I realized I could too. We all can, Richard replied. We just need the courage to accept help and the persistence to never give up. Judge Daniel Howard Thompson was also present at the party. Sergeant, I have a proposal for you. What proposal, Corporal Daniel? The court is launching a pilot assistance program for the homeless. We'd like you to be the coordinator. But I'm still training to be a counselor. And that's exactly why you're the right person for the job. You understand both the human and legal sides of the issue. Richard looked over at Sarah, who was dancing with Paul. Can I think about it? Of course, but no, it would only be part-time. You could continue your work at the therapeutic farm. The offer was tempting. It would mean returning to the place where his recovery had begun, but now as someone helping others in similar situations. A few months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Mary Charles Edward Helen was born. On a sunny spring morning, with Richard waiting in the hospital lobby. "Dad," Sarah said when he entered the room, "come meet your granddaughter." Richard approached the crib and saw a tiny, perfect child, her eyes wide open as she took in the world. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Would you like to hold her?" With trembling but steady hands, Richard cradled his granddaughter. The baby looked straight into his eyes as if recognizing something in him. "Hi, Mary," he said softly. "I'm your Grandpa Rich. I promise I'll always be here for you." "Dad," Sarah said, "would you be her godfather?" "It would be the greatest honor of my life." At that moment, holding his granddaughter, Richard felt the circle was complete. He had lost everything, hit rock bottom, but now he was rebuilding something even stronger from the ruins of his past. 6 months later, Richard accepted Judge Daniel Howard Thompson's proposal. Twice a week, he worked at the court as the coordinator of the Homeless Assistance Program. The other days, he continued at the therapeutic farm, helping veterans in recovery. "How's the experience at the court going?" Sarah asked during a visit. "Challenging but rewarding," Richard replied, holding Mary in his arms. "Yesterday, I met a Navy veteran in the same situation I was in 2 years ago. And how did it go?" "At first, he was resistant, angry, but when I told him my story, I saw something change in his eyes. I saw hope." "What happened then?" "He agreed to join the recovery program. He'll start treatment next week." Sarah smiled. "Dad, you saved another life." "We saved it, Sarah. This whole support network that formed around me. Colonel William, Judge Daniel Howard, you, Dr. Martin, Brooks, Major Joseph Charles Peterson. We all saved that life together. That's how it should always be. That's how it is now." The program had already helped 17 people in 6 months. Not all had fully recovered, but each had been given a fair chance. Mary began to cry, and Richard gently rocked her until she calmed. "She loves her grandpa," Sarah observed. "And I love her more than I ever thought possible," Richard replied. "When I look at her, I see the future. I see endless possibilities." "Dad, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you still think about Mom?" "Every day," he answered, without hesitation. "But now I think of her with gratitude, not guilt. I'm grateful for the privilege of loving her, even if it was only for a short time." "And Charles Edward?" "I think of him every day too, and I try to honor his memory by helping other young veterans who are lost like he was." Sarah took her father's hand. "Dad, I need to tell you something I've never said before. Go ahead. I forgive you for everything, for the choices you made, for the distance between us, for the lost years. I forgive you completely." Richard felt a deep emotion wash over him. "Thank you, my daughter. This means more to me than you can imagine. And I hope you can also fully forgive yourself. I'm working on it every day, with Dr. Martin's help, with prayers, and with the love you all show me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A year after Mary's birth, Richard received an unexpected call. "Sergeant Richard, this is Colonel Armstrong from the Military Command in Washington, D.C. "Yes, Colonel?" "Sergeant, we'd like to invite you to a special ceremony. The Army is honoring veterans who have distinguished themselves both in active service and in civilian life." "I don't understand, Colonel." "Sergeant, your story of recovery and your current work with vulnerable veterans has become a national example. We want to honor you officially." Richard was silent for a few seconds. "Colonel, I'm deeply grateful for the honor, but I don't know if I deserve it." "Sergeant, deserving isn't the point. The point is inspiration. Your story is inspiring veterans across the country to seek help and believe in the possibility of recovery." "When would the ceremony be?" "Next month in Washington, D.C. Your family is invited, of course." Richard accepted the invitation, but with one condition, that other veterans he had helped would also be invited. On the day of the ceremony, Richard was once again in full uniform, but this time not alone. Sarah, Paul, and little Mary were by his side, along with a delegation of veterans from the therapeutic farm. "Sergeant Richard Turner Johnson," announced Colonel Armstrong before an audience of hundreds, "in recognition of exceptional service to the United States Armed Forces and for the extraordinary example of resilience and dedication to the well-being of vulnerable veterans, the U.S. Army awards you the Military Merit Medal." As Richard stepped forward to receive the medal, the entire audience rose and applauded, just as it had happened in the courtroom 2 years prior, but now for entirely different reasons. "Sergeant," the colonel said as he pinned the medal, "we are proud to have you among our ranks." "The honor is mine, Colonel." After the ceremony, journalists approached for interviews. "Sergeant Richard, what's your message to other veterans who may be struggling? That it's never too late to start over. That asking for help isn't a sign of weakness but of courage, and that we all have worth, no matter what circumstances we've faced. And what's your advice for families of veterans in difficulty? Don't give up. Sometimes the person we love is so lost in the darkness that they can't see the hand reaching out to help them. But keep reaching out, because one day they'll see it and accept it." "What are your plans for the future?" Richard looked at Sarah, who was holding Mary in her arms. "To keep working with veterans, to be the best grandfather I can be to my granddaughter, and to honor the second chance life has given me every single day." After the interview, Sarah walked up to him. "Dad, how does it feel to be officially recognized as a hero again?" "I feel responsible," he replied. "Responsible for using this recognition to help others and to show that true strength isn't about never falling, but about getting back up after you fall." "And will you keep getting back up?" "Every day, Sarah. Every day." That night, in the hotel in Washington, D.C., Richard stood on the balcony gazing at the stars. Sarah joined him, carrying Mary in her arms. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "I'm thinking about your mother, about how proud she would be to see all this. She is seeing it, Dad, I'm sure of it. And I'm thinking about Charles Edward, how I wish he could be here with us if things had been different. Dad, you can't carry this guilt forever." "It's not guilt, Sarah, it's responsibility. The responsibility to live not just for myself, but for him too. To do the things he never got the chance to do." Mary mumbled something unintelligible and Richard smiled. "What do you think she's trying to say?" "I think she's saying Grandpa is very wise," Sarah replied affectionately. "Or that it's time for her bottle," Richard said, laughing. They stayed there a few more minutes, 3 generations together, looking toward the future with hope. 2 years later, the court's homeless assistance program had become a regional model. Richard had been promoted to general coordinator, overseeing not just veterans, but anyone in a vulnerable social situation. "Sergeant," Judge Daniel Howard said during a meeting, "the numbers are impressive, an 80% success rate in social reintegration." "The success isn't mine, Your Honor. It's the whole team's and most of all the people who had the courage to accept help. But it was your vision that made it all possible. My vision was shaped by my experience. I know what works, because I know what's needed." Sarah, now working as a social worker for the program, joined the conversation. "Dad, we have a new proposal." "What proposal?" "The state government wants to expand the program to 5 more cities in the region. They want you to be the lead consultant for implementation." Richard considered it. "Would that mean a lot of travel?" "Yes, but you'd be based here. You'd make monthly visits to the other cities to oversee progress." "And you think it's worth it?" "Dad," Sarah said, "thinking of all the lives that could be saved, it's absolutely worth it." "Then I accept." In the following months, Richard traveled to the 5 cities, setting up programs like the one he'd created in his hometown. In each place, he encountered situations that mirrored his own journey. On one trip, he met a young veteran named Peter, who had been living on the streets for 3 years. "Man, you don't know anything about my life," Peter said, resistant at first. "You're right," Richard replied calmly. "I don't know your specific story, but I do know some things about living on the streets." "How would you know?" "Because I was homeless for over 10 years. Peter eyed Richard skeptically. "You? Dressed like that, with an official car?" "Peter, 4 years ago, I was sleeping under awnings and eating at soup kitchens. Today I run social assistance programs. The difference isn't that I'm better than you, it's that I had people who never gave up on me. So you're saying you won't give up on me? Exactly. But more importantly, I'll teach you not to give up on yourself. Peter eventually accepted help and became one of the program's biggest success stories. 6 months later, he was clean, sober, and working as an assistant in the very same program. "Sergeant Richard," Peter said during a follow-up meeting, "how can I repay everything you've done for me? By doing for another young veteran what we did for you." "I can do that?" "You can, and you should. Your experience, like mine, can save lives." Peter became one of Richard's assistants, specializing in helping young veterans. His recovery story became as inspiring as Richard's own. "Dad," Sarah said during one of their regular visits, "you're raising an entire generation of veterans who help other veterans." "That was always the goal, Sarah, to create a support network that's sustainable, one that keeps growing even when I'm gone." "You're not going anywhere for a long time," she said, watching him play with Mary, who was now 2 years old, and called her grandfather Grandpa Rich. "Grandpa Rich!" Mary shouted, running toward him. "Hi, my princess," said Richard, picking her up. "How's my most beautiful girl?" "They play," said Mary, pointing to the toys. "Let's play then." As she watched her father play with his granddaughter, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey they had all lived, from a homeless man on trial to a nationally respected coordinator, from a resentful daughter to a reunited and strong family. "Dad," she said when Mary was distracted with the toys, "have you ever thought about writing a book about your experience?" "So what for?" "To inspire even more people. Your story has already helped hundreds of veterans personally. A book could help thousands." "I'm not a writer, Sarah, but you're a born storyteller. How many times have I seen you change someone's life just by telling your story?" Richard considered the suggestion. "If I did it, it would be to give a voice to all the veterans who weren't as lucky as I was, to show that behind every homeless person, there's a story, dignity, and a chance for redemption." "Why, exactly. That's why you should write it." "I'll think about it." A few months later, Richard began working on his memoirs with the help of a professional writer. The book, titled From Rock Bottom to the Stars, A Veteran's Journey, became a bestseller and carried his message of hope across the country. "Sergeant," the publisher said during the launch, "this book is inspiring not just veterans, but anyone facing seemingly insurmountable hardships." "That was always the goal," Richard replied, "to show that life can take unexpected turns, but there's always reason for hope." During the book tour, Richard visited over 20 cities, always accompanied by Sarah and Mary. In each place, he met people whose lives had been touched by stories similar to his. "Sergeant Richard," said a woman in her 70s at an event in New York City, "my son is a veteran and is struggling. Your story gave me hope that he can recover too." "Ma'am, never give up on your son. Sometimes we veterans need to hit rock bottom to realize there's still solid ground beneath us. How can I help him?" "Keep loving him, even when he seems undeserving. Keep reaching out, even when he refuses. And when he's ready, he'll accept your help." Conversations like this repeated in every city. Richard realized his story had become something bigger than his personal experience. It had become a symbol that redemption is always possible. Back in his hometown, Richard continued his daily work in the social assistance program, but now with a broader perspective. He knew his mission had grown beyond regional limits. "Dad," Sarah said during a family dinner, "I have some news." "What news?" "Paul and I are having another baby." Richard nearly dropped the glass of juice he was drinking. "Another grandchild?" "Or granddaughter," Sarah said, smiling. "It's still too early to tell." "What wonderful news!" Richard exclaimed, standing up to hug his daughter. Mary, sitting in her high chair, clapped without fully understanding what was happening, but caught up in the adult's joy. "Baby brother," she said, one of the few words she could pronounce clearly. "That's right, Mary," Sarah said. "You're going to have a little brother or sister." "When is it due?" Richard asked. "In August. It'll be a winter baby." "Your brother Charles Edward was born in winter," Richard remembered. "In July." Dad, do you think it would be appropriate to name the baby after him? If it's a boy? I think it would be a beautiful tribute. Paul, who had been quietly observing the conversation, finally spoke up. Richard, there's something I'd like to talk to you about. Go ahead, Paul. I wanted to thank you for accepting me into the family so easily. I know not every father would welcome a son-in-law they barely know. Paul, when I saw how you care for Sarah and Mary, I knew you were a good man. I didn't need to know anything else. And I'd like to ask for your blessing to give this new baby my last name, but keeping Smith as the middle name, in honor of our family. Richard was moved. Paul, it would be an honor. So if it's a boy, he'll be Charles Edward Smith Brown. If it's a girl, she'll be Helen Mary Smith Brown. Helen, Richard repeated, after her grandmother. For our family, Sarah confirmed. That night, after Sarah, Paul, and Mary had left, Richard stayed alone in his small house at the therapeutic farm, reflecting on the unexpected blessings life had brought him. He opened a photo album Sarah had put together for him, filled with pictures from his entire recovery journey. There were photos from the day of the trial, the therapeutic farm, Sarah's wedding, Mary's birth, the military ceremony, the book launch. On one of the last pages was a picture of the whole family together at Mary's birthday party. Richard looked at his own image in the photo and could barely recognize the well-dressed, smiling man as the same person who had sat in the defendant's seat 4 years earlier. More important than the physical change, though, was the change in his eyes. Where there had once been despair and emptiness, there was now purpose and peace. He took out paper and a pen and began writing a letter to the grandchild who had yet to be born. My dear grandchild, when you read this letter, I'll probably be a very old grandpa, but I hope I'll still be around to tell you our family's stories in person. I want you to know that your existence is a miracle, not just because every life is a miracle, but because you're proof that love can overcome any obstacle. There was a time when I thought our family was gone forever. I believed pain and loss had won, but your mother, my daughter Sarah, never gave up hope that we could find our way back to each other. You'll grow up knowing only the Grandpa Rich, who recovered, who helps people, who writes books and receives medals. But I also want you to know about the Grandpa Rich who was lost, who lived on the streets, who almost gave up on everything. Not to scare you, but so you understand that we all face hard times in life. What defines us isn't whether we fall or not, but whether we have the courage to get back up when we do. Your great-grandmother, Mary Helen, whom you'll only know through photos and stories, used to say that life is like a book with many chapters. Some chapters are sad, others are happy, but we can only know how the story ends if we keep reading to the last page. I almost closed my book in the middle of the story. How lucky I didn't, because the best chapters were still to come. When you arrive, you'll be the start of a new chapter for our family, one full of possibilities, dreams, and love. I promise to be the best grandfather I can be for you, just as I promise to keep helping other veterans and other families reunite. With all my love, Grandpa Rich. Richard folded the letter carefully and placed it in a special box alongside other important mementos from his recovery journey. The next morning, he returned to his normal routine: physical exercises, communal breakfast at the farm, a meeting with the social assistance program team, and then some individual sessions with veterans in treatment. Sergeant Richard said, one of the younger veterans, Philip, 25 years old, "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Philip. How do you manage to keep hope alive every day? I mean, after everything you've been through, how do you wake up optimistic?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Philip, I don't wake up optimistic every day. Sometimes I wake up sad, sometimes afraid, sometimes angry, but I wake up, and that's already a start." "But how do you stay motivated to keep going?" "Because I've learned my life isn't just about me. It's about my daughter, my granddaughter, about all of you here at the farm, about every veteran I'll still help. When we live only for ourselves, it's easy to give up. When we live for others too, we find strength we didn't even know we had. What if I don't have anyone to live for? Philip, you have yourself, and that's reason enough. Besides, when you recover, you'll find there are plenty of people waiting to be part of your life." "How so?" "When I was on the streets, I thought I was alone in the world, but I realized there were many people who wanted to help me. I just couldn't see them because of my pain. Philip nodded, absorbing Richard's words. "Sergeant, can I ask you another favor?" "Go ahead." "Can you teach me how to write letters?" "Letters to whom?" "To my mother. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. She tried to help me many times, but I pushed her away. Now I want to try to rebuild that relationship." Richard smiled. "It'll be my pleasure to teach you, Philip. We'll start today." And so Richard's mission continued to grow, not just helping veterans recover, but also helping them rebuild their family and social ties. 6 months later, at the birth of his second grandchild, Richard was in the hospital waiting room just as he had been for Mary's birth. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. There was no anxiety or fear, only joyful anticipation. "Dad," said Sarah, entering the waiting room with the baby in her arms, "come meet Charles Edward Smith Brown." Richard stepped closer and saw a healthy baby, eyes wide open and alert. "He's perfect," Richard whispered. "Want to hold him?" "Of course." When Richard took his grandson into his arms, the baby stared straight into his eyes, just as Mary had done. "Hi, Charles Edward," he said softly. "I'm your grandpa, Richard. You were named after my son, your uncle, who's no longer with us. But you'll grow up knowing how special he was, and how special you are too." The baby babbled something as if responding. "Dad," Sarah said, "he seems to recognize you." "Maybe it's the voice," Richard replied. "I used to sing to you and Charles Edward when you were babies." "You sang? Your mother always said I had a terrible voice, but that you loved it anyway. Sing for him." Richard began humming an old lullaby he used to sing to Sarah and Charles Edward. The baby immediately calmed and closed his eyes, as if his grandfather's voice was familiar and comforting. "It's a miracle," Sarah murmured. "You're all miracles," Richard answered. "Miracles that remind me every day that life is worth living." Paul walked into the room just then, smiling at the scene. "How are the 3 of you?" "Perfect," Richard said. "Your son is beautiful, Paul." "Our son," Paul corrected, "and he has an exceptional grandfather." At that moment, Mary came running into the room, eager to see her little brother. "Baby," she shouted, trying to climb onto the bed for a better look. "Be careful, Mary," said Sarah. "The baby is very small." "Let her come closer," said Richard. "She needs to meet her brother." He knelt down to Mary's level and let her see the baby up close. "This is your little brother, Charles Edward," Richard explained. "You're going to be the big sister now, and that's a very important responsibility." "Protect," said Mary, a word she had recently learned. "That's right. You'll protect your little brother, and he'll look up to you so much." Mary gently touched the baby's hand, and for a moment the 4 generations of the family were connected. Richard, Sarah, Mary, and Charles Edward. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "thank you for fighting to get here, for choosing to live to see this moment. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." That night back at home, Richard called Colonel William to share the good news. "Colonel, you've got another recruit in the family." "Congratulations, Sergeant. How does it feel being a grandfather of 2? "I feel blessed and responsible. These 2 little ones will grow up hearing stories about discipline, honor, and service, and about overcoming and redemption. Yes, that too. I want them to understand that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up." "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you could go back in time and change anything, what would you change?" Richard thought for a long moment. "Colonel, I know it might sound strange, but I wouldn't change a thing. Not even the years on the streets? Not even the years on the streets. Because it was exactly that experience that gave me the ability to help other veterans today. If I hadn't gone through all of that, I wouldn't truly understand their pain." "That's very wise, Sergeant. Besides, if I changed the past, maybe Sarah wouldn't have become a social worker. Maybe she wouldn't have been ready to forgive me when we reunited. Maybe our lives wouldn't have aligned exactly as they did." "Do you believe everything happened for a reason?" "I believe we can find meaning in everything that happens if we're willing to look, and that our responsibility is to use our experiences, good and bad, to do something positive in the world. Sergeant, it's an honor to know you." "The honor is mine, Colonel." After the call, Richard stepped out onto the porch of his house and looked up at the starry sky. It was a clear night and the stars shone brightly. "Mary Helen," he said aloud, "you wouldn't believe how our family has grown and grown stronger. Charles Edward would be proud too. Our grandchildren will grow up knowing who you were and how much you were loved." A gentle breeze rustled the trees around the farm, and Richard felt a deep peace wash over him. "Thank you," he said, not entirely sure who he was thanking, but feeling it was important to express his gratitude. The next day, Richard returned to his routine, but with renewed energy. During the morning meeting with his social assistance team, he announced a new initiative. "Everyone, I'd like to propose creating a sub-program specifically for family reunification." "How would it work?" asked Sarah. "Many of the veterans we work with have families but lost contact because of the hardships they faced. I want to create a program that helps rebuild those relationships whenever it's possible and beneficial for both sides." "Is this based on your own experience?" asked one of the team psychologists. "Exactly. If Sarah hadn't found me in that courtroom, I never would have had the courage to reach out to her. But when we reunited, we were both ready to rebuild our relationship. And how would we identify which cases are appropriate for reunification? Through careful psychological evaluation of both parties. It's not about forcing reconciliations, but facilitating them when there's mutual interest and potential for success." The proposal was unanimously approved, and Richard was put in charge of coordinating the program's implementation. In the following months, the Family Reunification Program achieved remarkable results. 17 veterans managed to re-establish contact with family members, and 12 were able to rebuild meaningful relationships. "Dad," said Sarah during one of the program evaluations, "the numbers are impressive, but more important are the individual stories. Tell me about one of them. Remember Philip, that young man you taught to write letters?" "Of course. He not only reconciled with his mother, but she now visits him every week. And more, she's become a volunteer for the program, helping other mothers of struggling veterans. What wonderful news!" "There's more. Philip is graduating as a nursing technician and wants to work with veterans suffering from psychological trauma. He's turning his experience into purpose." "Exactly, just like you did." Richard smiled. "The circle completes itself, Sarah. Veterans helping veterans, families reuniting, pain turning into purpose." "Dad, can I make an observation?" "Of course." "You seem happier now than at any time since we reunited." Richard thought about it. "You know why? Because now I fully understand my purpose. It's not just about my own recovery, but using that recovery to help others heal too." "And how does it feel knowing your work is spreading to other cities, other states?" "I feel humble and responsible. Every time I hear about a veteran being helped by a program inspired by ours, I remember this is bigger than any one of us." That weekend, Richard received an unexpected visit. Corporal Daniel, now a retired veteran and former judge, came to the farm with his family. "Sergeant," said Daniel Howard, "I wanted my family to meet the man who influenced me most in life." "Daniel, you embarrass me." "Not at all. I want my children and grandchildren to understand what true leadership and perseverance mean." Daniel Howard introduced his wife, his 2 adult children, and 3 teenage grandchildren. "This is Sergeant Richard," he said solemnly, "the man who taught me to be a soldier and, more importantly, that it's never too late to do the right thing." "Pleasure to meet you all," said Richard. Daniel Howard was always an exceptional young man. It doesn't surprise me he became a respected judge and admirable family man. "Sergeant," said one of Daniel Howard's grandsons, a boy about 16, "I read your book for a school project on national heroes." "And what did you think?" "I think you're brave twice over. Once for being a military hero, and again for having the courage to start over when all seemed lost." "Thank you. But know that the courage that let me start over came from the discipline I learned in the army. One thing led to another. I want to serve in the army when I turn 18. Richard looked at Daniel Howard, who nodded approvingly. "If that's your calling, you'll be an exceptional soldier. But remember, being a soldier is more than wearing a uniform. It's about serving something greater than yourself." "I'll remember that, Sergeant." During lunch at the farm, the 2 families, Richard's and Daniel Howard's, shared stories and laughter. It was a celebration of a friendship that had lasted over 40 years and survived all hardships. Sergeant, said Daniel Howard's wife. Thank you for shaping my husband into the principled young man he became. The credit was all his, ma'am. I just pointed the way. No, Sergeant, interrupted Daniel Howard Thompson. You did much more than that. You taught me that leadership is about serving others, not being served by them. Richard Turner Johnson looked around the table, seeing all those people who had in some way been touched by his life. Sarah Johnson and Paul with their 2 children, Daniel and his family, some veterans from the farm who had joined them for lunch. You know what amazes me the most about all this, he said. What? Asked Sarah. How a life that seemed completely lost could produce so much good. How many other lives have been touched through each person sitting here? Dad, that's called gay legacy. And the most beautiful part, added Daniel, is that your legacy is just beginning. The veterans you're helping today will help others tomorrow. And my grandchildren will grow up knowing they should help others, no matter the circumstances, said Richard, looking at Mary and Charles Edward. After Daniel's visit, Richard felt inspired to expand his work even further. He proposed creating a national training center for veteran counselors. The idea is to train recovered veterans to become certified counselors in their own communities, he explained, during a presentation to military and civilian officials. How many counselors could be trained each year? Asked one of the attendees. We'd start with groups of 20 veterans every 3 months. That would give us 80 new counselors a year. And where would this center operate? I'm proposing an expansion of the current therapeutic farm. We'd have both recovery facilities and training facilities in the same location. The proposal was approved, and Richard became the director of the first National Training Center for Veteran Counselors. Dad, Sarah said when she heard the news, you're building something that will last for generations. That's the goal, Sarah, so that when I'm no longer here, the work continues through all the people we've trained. And how do you feel about that responsibility? Honored and determined. Every veteran we train will return to their community able to help dozens of others. It's a ripple effect of impact. The training center opened 2 years later, attended by national officials and representatives from veteran organizations across the country. Today, we're not just opening a training center, Richard said during the ceremony, but a new era in support for American veterans. Sergeant Richard, a journalist asked, what are your expectations for the next 10 years? My hope is that in 10 years, there won't be a single American veteran living on the streets due to lack of proper support. That everyone will have access to a network of people who truly understand their struggles. And how will you get there? Through multiplication. Every veteran we train here will train others in their communities. It's a cascading effect of support and understanding. What's your message for veterans still facing hardships? Don't give up, seek help. And know there are people who understand exactly what you're going through, people who've been where you are and made it out. After the ceremony, Richard walked through the new center's facilities. He saw young veterans in training, some still in recovery, others already stable and learning how to help others. Sergeant called one of the trainees. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you keep up the energy for all this work? I mean, you're over 60. Richard laughed. Son, I have energy because I have purpose. When you find something worth living for, the energy comes naturally. And when you retire? From what? Helping people. That's not a job, it's a calling. Callings don't retire. So you're going to keep doing this forever? As long as God allows me, and as long as there are veterans in need of help. That night, Richard received a call from Sarah. Dad, I have some news to share. Good or bad? Good, very good. Go ahead. Paul got a job offer in another city. A really good position, a great opportunity for his career. And are you two going to accept? Only if you come with us. Richard was surprised. What do you mean? Dad, the city has a serious problem with homeless veterans. They want to implement a program like ours, and they want you to be the coordinator. Sarah, I can't just abandon the work here. You wouldn't be abandoning it, you'd be expanding it. The training center is already established and has a capable team. You could supervise it remotely and start a new project in the new city. Richard considered the proposal. How long does Paul have to give an answer? 2 weeks. Give me a few days to think about it. Of course, Dad. But know this, Our family wants to stay together. We've spent too much time apart already. Over the next few days, Richard spoke with his team, with Colonel Armstrong, and with the veterans at the retreat about the possibility of moving. Sergeant, Major Joseph Charles said, "You've built something solid here. You can trust that we'll carry on your work. But what if you need me? We will, but not in person. You'll always be our consultant and mentor, no matter where you are. And the training center? It runs itself now. The instructors are ready. The methods are documented. The system works." Colonel Armstrong was just as encouraging. "Sergeant, it's time for you to plant that seed in new soil, and your family needs you." "Colonel, I'm afraid I'm being selfish, putting my family above the work." "Richard, your family is part of your work. Sarah is a social worker. Your grandchildren will grow up with these values. Keeping the family together is an investment in the future of the work itself." After a week of reflection, Richard made his decision. "Sarah," he said during a call, "I accept." "Accept what?" "The move. We'll go together to the new city." "Dad, are you sure?" "I am. It's long past time I put my family first, and if this new city needs help with veterans, we'll help." "That's wonderful news. The kids will be so happy." "And when would the move be?" "In 2 months. Plenty of time for you to organize the transition here." "Perfect." The move was carefully planned. Richard arranged the handover of his responsibilities, trained new coordinators, and ensured all programs would continue running smoothly. On the eve of the move, the retreat held a farewell party. Veterans who had been helped by Richard over the years came from different cities to say goodbye. "Sergeant," said Philip, now a certified nurse working with veterans, "thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Philip, you did all the work. I just showed you it was possible. And now I'll do the same for others." Exactly. That's how the chain of good keeps going. One by one, the veterans said their goodbyes, each sharing how Richard had impacted their lives. It was a powerful testament to the legacy he was leaving behind. "Sergeant," Major Joseph Charles said at the end of the night, "you're not saying goodbye, you're expanding. You'll always be part of this family, and you'll always be part of mine too." In the new city, Richard was welcomed as a national hero. The mayor, the council members, the local organizations, everyone wanted to meet the man who had revolutionized veteran care in the country. "Mr. Richard," said the mayor, "our city has a serious problem. We estimate there are over 200 homeless veterans." 200, repeated Richard. "That's a significant number, but not impossible to address. What would be your first step?" "Conduct a detailed census. Understand who these people are, their specific stories, and what kind of support each one needs. And then, create a local support network. Identify doctors, psychologists, social workers, employers, and volunteers willing to help." "How long until we see results?" "Initial results in 3 months, meaningful progress in a year, full transformation in 3. And you truly believe it's possible?" "I do, because I've seen it happen. But more importantly, I'll make it happen." Richard set up his operations base in an old warehouse renovated into a temporary shelter. Sarah secured a position at City Hall, coordinating municipal social programs. "Dad," she said during their first month in the new city, "how are you feeling?" "Like I'm starting a new adventure. It's exciting and challenging at the same time." "Do you miss the farm?" "I do, but I don't regret the decision. Being close to you all, watching Mary and Charles Edward grow, that's priceless. The kids love having Grandpa so nearby. And I love being a present grandfather." The work in the new city quickly showed results. Within 3 months, Richard had identified and begun assisting 150 vulnerable veterans. "Sergeant Richard," said a local journalist, "the numbers are impressive. How do you achieve such rapid progress?" "Experience and method. I know what works because I've tested it in the field, and I have an exceptional team." "What's been the most striking case so far?" "Every case is striking, but I can tell you about retired Colonel Robert Wilson, a colonel living on the streets. Yes, he lost his wife and 2 children in a car accident 5 years ago. He couldn't cope with the guilt of being the sole survivor." "How did you help him?" "First, by acknowledging his pain as legitimate and understandable, then offering specialized psychological support, finally giving him a new purpose, coordinating aid for other veterans with similar trauma. Did he accept? Not only accepted, he became one of our most effective coordinators. He understands deep pain because he's lived it. Once again, the concept of veterans helping veterans. Exactly, it's the foundation of everything we do. A year after the move, Richard received an unexpected call. "Sergeant Richard, this is the Defense Minister's advisor." "Yes?" "The Minister would like to meet with you to discuss the possibility of nationalizing your veteran assistance methods." "Nationalizing?" "Yes, implementing your model in every US capital as official public policy." Richard was stunned by the scale of the proposal. "That would be extraordinary. Would you be willing to lead this nationwide implementation?" "I'd need to speak with my family first." "Of course, but know this could impact thousands of veterans across the country." That evening, during family dinner, Richard shared the proposal. "Dad," said Sarah, "this is incredible. You'd be responsible for nationwide change, but it would mean much more travel, much more responsibility. And many more lives saved," added Paul. "Grandpa's gonna help everyone?" asked Mary, now 4, and aware her grandfather had special work. "God willing, Mary, Grandpa will help many people. I want to help too, and you will, my princess. When you grow up, you can choose a profession that helps people, like Mommy and Grandpa do." Charles Edward, now 2 years old, didn't understand the conversation, but clapped when he saw the adults smile. "Dad," said Sarah, "what's your decision?" "My decision is to accept, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "First, my base stays here, close to all of you. Second, the implementation will be gradual, respecting the unique needs of each region. Third, the focus remains on veterans helping veterans. Those conditions sound very reasonable to me. And fourth, I want you to be my national coordinator for social services." Sarah was surprised. "Dad, I don't know if I'm qualified for that." "Sarah, you know this work better than anyone. You've been with me from the beginning, you understand the methods, and you have the necessary training. But wouldn't that be nepotism? It would be competence. You're the most qualified person for the job." Sarah looked at Paul, who nodded encouragingly. "All right, Dad, I accept." The national implementation of the Veterans Assistance Program took 3 years to complete. By the end, every state capital in the United States had operational service centers, coordinated by local veterans trained in the method developed by Richard. "Sergeant," said the Secretary of Defense during the program's completion ceremony, "you've transformed the reality of American veterans." "Secretary, I only systematized something that already existed, the solidarity between comrades in arms. The numbers speak for themselves. 12,000 veterans served, 8,000 in successful recovery, 400 new counselors trained, and most importantly, dozens of families reunited, hundreds of lives saved, thousands of people who regained hope. What's your next project, Sergeant?" "Retirement, Mr. Secretary." "Retirement? Not from helping people, but from national coordination. I want to spend more time with my grandchildren and focus on writing a new book." "What will the new book be about?" "About the stories of all the veterans I've helped over the years. Each one has a unique journey of overcoming." Sarah, who was present at the ceremony, stepped forward. "Dad, are you sure about retiring from national coordination?" "I am, Sarah. The program is established, you're ready to take over, and I want to make the most of my remaining years focusing on family." "You deserve that, Dad. We all do. A united family, healthy grandchildren, meaningful work. We're very blessed." The day after the ceremony, Richard formalized his retirement from national coordination, passing responsibility to Sarah. He would keep only an advisory role and dedicate himself to local activities. "How does it feel to be officially retired?" asked Paul. "Free and eager to start a new chapter." "What new chapter?" "The chapter of just being Grandpa. Picking up the kids from school, teaching them important things, telling them family stories. And the new book? I'll write it in my free time. No pressure, no deadline, only when inspiration strikes." Mary, now 6 years old and already reading, approached her grandfather. "Grandpa, will you write stories for children too?" If you'd like, Mary, I can write special stories just for you and Charles Edward. Yes, about what? About a grandpa who was a soldier and learned that life's greatest adventure is helping others. And did he have children? He had a very special daughter who grew up to be a wonderful woman who also helps people. And did the daughter have children? She had 2 beautiful children who were their grandpa's joy. And did they live happily ever after? Richard smiled. They lived happily ever after, Mary, but more importantly, they lived in a way that made a difference in other people's lives. That night, Richard began writing the first chapter of his children's book. It was an adapted version of his own story, told in a way that children could understand the values of perseverance, forgiveness, and mutual help. 6 months later, Sarah announced she was pregnant with their 3rd child. Dad, you're going to have another grandchild. What wonderful news. How are you feeling? Happy and a little nervous. 3 kids is a big responsibility. You're exceptional parents, and you have a grandfather who'll help with everything you need. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Benedicta Mary Helen. Benedicta, in your honor, for everything you mean to our family. Richard was moved. It would be an extraordinary honor. And if it's a boy, it'll be Anthony Richard Smith Brown. Anthony? After Grandpa Anthony, Mom's father, who you always spoke of so fondly. You've thought of everything. We thought of a family that honors its roots and looks to the future with hope. 9 months later, Benedicta Mary Helen Smith Brown was born. When Richard saw her for the first time, he felt his life had come full circle. Hi, Benedicta, he whispered to the baby. You've come to complete our family. The little girl looked at him with the same alert eyes her siblings had shown, as if recognizing she was in the arms of someone special. 3 grandchildren, Richard murmured. 3 opportunities to pass on values, history, and love. Dad, Sarah said, do you have specific plans for them? I do. I want them to grow up knowing where they came from, valuing family, respecting others, and understanding we all have a responsibility to help those in need. And how will you do that? Through examples, stories, and lots of love. In the years that followed, Richard devoted himself intensely to his grandchildren's upbringing. He picked up Mary from school every day, taught Charles Edward how to ride a bike, and sang lullabies to Benedicta. Grandpa, Mary asked one day when she was 8, why do you always talk about helping people? Because that's how life becomes complete, Mary. When we help others, we discover the best in ourselves. But isn't it hard work? It's very hard work, but it's work that makes our hearts happy. And when I grow up, can I help people too? If you want to, yes, everyone can help in their own way. How? You could be a doctor and help by healing. You could be a teacher and help by teaching. You could be a lawyer and help by defending rights. Or you could be anything else that uses your talents to do good for others. What if I want to be like you? Mary, you already are like me. You have a kind heart and care about others. The rest is just choosing a profession. Charles Edward, now 5, also started asking questions about his grandfather's work. Grandpa, why were those men on TV so sad? Because they lost their homes and their families, Charles Edward. Like when we lost Grandma Mary Helen. Yes, but different. We lost Grandma because she got sick. They lost their families because their souls were sick. And did you help them get better in their souls? I tried to help, yes, and many did get better. When I grow up, can I help too? Of course you can. And you'll be very good at it, because you have a big heart like your mum's. Benedicta, still very little, just babbled and smiled when her grandfather talked to her. But Richard was already planning the conversations they'd have when she grew up. At 70, Richard published his second book, Little Heroes, Stories of Courage for Children. The book contained adapted versions of the recovery stories of the veterans he'd helped, written so children could understand values like perseverance, forgiveness, and solidarity. Dad, said Sarah at the book launch, you're raising a new generation that will grow up with these values. That's the goal, Sarah. If we can teach today's children the importance of helping others, we'll have more compassionate adults tomorrow. And your own grandchildren are the first to learn these lessons. They're my favorite guinea pigs, Richard said, laughing. and also my greatest pride. During the signing session, a girl of about 10 approached with the book. "Mr. Richard, I read all the stories. Which one is true?" "They're all true, sweetheart. Each story happened to a real person I met and helped. Even the one about the soldier who lived on the streets?" "Especially that one," Richard replied, kneeling to meet her eye level. "That story is about me." "You lived on the streets?" "I did, for many years. And now you're famous and write books? Now I have a wonderful family and work helping people. Fame isn't what matters. So anyone can change their life?" "Anyone can change their life, as long as they have the courage to accept help and the persistence to never give up." The girl smiled and asked Richard to sign her book with a special dedication. "To Sophie, a brave girl who will make a difference in the world. With love, Grandpa Rich." "Why did you write Grandpa Rich?" "Because all my young readers are my grandchildren at heart." When the signing ended, Richard returned home feeling fulfilled. His stories were reaching not just adult veterans, but also planting seeds of compassion and resilience in children. "How was the launch?" Sarah asked when he arrived. "Wonderful. Talking to the children, I realize they understand these values much more purely than many adults." "And how are you feeling with all this recognition?" "Grateful, but aware that the responsibility only grows. Every person inspired by my story expects me to keep being worthy of that inspiration." "Dad, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be human. But a human who strives every day to be better." Mary, who had accompanied her grandfather to the launch, shared her version of events. "Mom, Grandpa talked to a girl who cried because her story was just like his." "Like how, Mary?" "She said her daddy also got sad and left home." Sarah looked at Richard with concern. "Dad, you spoke to a child whose father abandoned the family." "I did, and I gave her mother my card. If she wants, I can try to help locate the father and see if there's a chance for reconciliation. And if there isn't, then I'll help the mother and daughter move forward the best they can." The next day, Richard received a call from the girl's mother, Carla Simmons. "Mr. Richard, my daughter Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you. She said you might help find her father." "Mrs. Carla, I can try, but first, I need to understand the situation better. Can I come speak with you in person?" "Of course, let's arrange a meeting." 2 days later, Carla arrived at Richard's support center, bringing Sophie along. "Mr. Richard," Carla said, "my ex-husband Robert served in the army for 15 years. When he was discharged 3 years ago, he couldn't adjust to civilian life." "What happened specifically?" "He got depressed, started drinking, lost several jobs. When Sophie was 6, he just disappeared one night. Left a note saying, 'We were better off without him.' Did you try to find him?" "I tried through the police, but he didn't commit any crime. Apparently he has the right to just vanish if he wants." Sophie, who had stayed quiet, finally spoke. "Grandpa Rich, can you make my daddy come back?" Richard knelt down in front of the little girl. "Sophie, I can't promise your daddy will come back, but I can promise I'll try to find him and talk to him." "What if he doesn't want to come back?" "Then I'll try to understand why he believes you're better off without him, and maybe I can convince him he's wrong. You managed to come back to your daughter." "I did, but only because my daughter never gave up on me. Sometimes we need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." Richard gathered all the information Carla had about Robert. Full name, last military unit he served in, army identification number, last known addresses. "I'll start the investigation today," he promised. "Mr. Richard," Carla said, "we don't have much money to pay for your services." "Mrs. Carla, I don't charge for helping families. This work is my way of repaying all the help I've received." That afternoon, Richard began using his military contacts to track down Robert Simmons. After a few calls, he got a promising lead. "Sergeant Richard, this is Major Smith from Portland. I got your call about Robert Simmons." "Did you find anything, Major?" "I did. He was here 6 months ago looking for work, but when he found out they'd have to contact family references, he backed out and disappeared again." "Was he okay?" "Physically, yes, but it was obvious he was struggling emotionally, thin, unshaven, worn-out clothes." "Any clue where he went?" "One of the soldiers said he saw him talking to homeless people near the bus terminal." "Thank you, Major. That gives me a starting point. Richard immediately called his contacts in Portland, other coordinators for veteran assistance programs. "John, it's Richard. I need a favor." "Of course, Sergeant. What do you need?" "I'm looking for a veteran named Robert Simmons. He might have come through your services in the last few months." "Robert Simmons. Name sounds familiar. Let me check our records." After a few minutes, John returned to the phone. "Richard, we have a record. Robert Simmons, 38, former Army corporal, repeatedly refused help, but some of our social workers spotted him several times near the bus terminal. Is he still in the city?" "We don't know. The last sighting was 2 weeks ago." "John, can you do something for me? If he shows up again, could you try talking to him about his daughter? Don't mention I'm looking for him. Just see if he shows any interest in hearing about his family." "Of course, Richard. I'll alert the whole team." Richard decided. He needed to go to Portland himself. He talked to Sarah about his decision. "Dad, are you sure this trip is worth it? He might not even be there anymore. Sarah, if it were Mary or Charles Edward who were lost, wouldn't you want someone to do everything possible to find them?" "I would." "Then I'll do everything I can to find Robert. That little girl deserves this chance." "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, you have responsibilities here. I'll just take a few local contacts." The night before his trip to Portland, Richard went to say goodbye to Sophie and Carla. "Grandpa Rich is really going to look for my daddy?" "I am, Sophie, and I'll tell him what a brave and smart girl you are. And that I miss him, especially that." "Mr. Richard," Carla said, "how can I thank you for what you're doing?" "By taking good care of Sophie and keeping faith that families can be reunited even when it seems impossible." In Portland, Richard stayed at a veterans support house and began his methodical search. He visited all the places where homeless people usually gathered: bridges, plazas, transit terminals. "Do you know a guy named Robert Simmons?" He asked every person he met. "Former military, about 38 years old." After 2 days of searching, he finally got a lead. "Yeah, I know him," said a homeless man named Anthony. "Robert comes around here sometimes, but he doesn't like talking about family." "When was the last time you saw him?" "Last night. He was sleeping under the Riverside Bridge." "Does he usually stay there?" "Sometimes, but he moves around a lot. Says he doesn't want to put down roots anywhere." Richard thanked him for the information and headed to the Riverside Bridge. He got there in the late afternoon and found several homeless people setting up their shelters for the night. "Is Robert Simmons around?" he asked a group. "Who wants to know?" replied a suspicious man. "My name's Richard. I'm a veteran too, and I'm looking for Robert to talk about his family." "He doesn't want to talk about family," said another man. "We've tried. Where can I find him?" "If you wait till around 9. Tonight he'll probably show up. But fair warning, he's not easy to approach." Richard decided to wait. At 9:30, he saw a thin, bearded man approaching, carrying an old backpack and a sleeping bag. "Robert Simmons?" Richard called. "Out." The man stopped and eyed him warily. "Who are you?" "My name's Richard. I'm a retired vet and run veteran assistance programs." "I don't need assistance," Robert said, walking on. "Robert, I'm not here to offer assistance. I'm here to talk about Sophie." Robert stopped dead in his tracks and turned around. "How do you know my daughter?" "She read my book at a signing. When she found out you'd served, she asked me to help find you." "Is she okay?" Robert asked, his voice cracking. "She's fine, but she misses you. It's better this way. She's better off without a failure like me." "Robert, can I tell you a story?" "What story?" "The story of a sergeant who also thought his family was better off without him." Robert hesitated, but finally stepped closer. "You've got 5 minutes." Richard told his own story to Robert, summarizing his journey from the streets back to his family. Robert listened quietly, occasionally shaking his head. "Your story's different from mine," Robert said when Richard finished. "You were a hero. I'm just a failure." "Robert, I spent over 10 years thinking the exact same thing, that I was a failure, that my family was better off without me." "And they weren't?" "No. My daughter suffered because I was gone. She needed her father, even if he wasn't perfect. But I've got nothing to offer Sophie. No job, no home, no money." "Robert, Sophie doesn't need your money. She needs your love." "How do you know?" Because when she talked about you, her eyes lit up. She didn't ask if you were rich or successful. She asked if you were coming back. Robert fell silent for a few minutes, staring at the river under the bridge. What if I go back and let her down again? What if you go back and find out you're stronger than you think? Richard, you don't get it. I can't hold a job, I drink too much, I have nightmares about the army. Robert, I get it perfectly. I've been through all of that. The difference is, now I know I don't have to go through it alone. How's that? There are treatment programs, support groups, therapists who specialize in veterans. You don't have to heal alone before going back to your family. You can heal with your family. What if I can't get better? Then at least Sophie will know you tried, that you love her enough to try. Robert started to cry. I miss her so much, Richard. Every single day. She misses you too, Robert. Every day. But what if... Robert, all the... what? Haves in the world won't change the fact that you're her father and she needs you. What do I need to do? First, accept help to recover. Second, establish gradual contact with Sophie and Carla. Third, work every day to be the father Sophie deserves. And can you help me with that? I can and I will, but the decision has to be yours. Robert looked at Richard with eyes full of hope and fear. If I accept your help, do you promise you won't give up on me? Robert, I promise I won't give up on you, even if you give up on yourself sometimes. Then I accept. Richard smiled and extended his hand to Robert. Welcome back to life, soldier. The next morning, Richard took Robert to the Veterans Assistance Center in Portland. There, Robert was evaluated by a medical and psychological team, and his treatment for alcohol dependency and depression began immediately. How long does the treatment take? Robert asked. That depends on you, replied Dr. Michael, the psychologist in charge. But usually between 3 to 6 months for stabilization, followed by ongoing support. And when can I see my daughter? We'll work on that gradually, said Richard. First, you need to be a little more stable. Then we can arrange a phone call, then a video chat, and finally an in-person meeting. What if she doesn't want to talk to me? Robert, she spent 3 years asking where you were. Trust me, she wants to talk to you. 3 weeks later, Richard arranged the first phone call between Robert and Sophie. Daddy, came Sophie's small voice on the other end. Hi, Princess, Robert answered, crying. How are you? I was sad because Daddy went away, but now I'm happy because Grandpa Rich found you. Sophie, Daddy is so sorry for leaving, so sorry. Daddy, are you coming back? I am, Sophie. But first I need to get better, like when you have a cold and need medicine. Ah, you sick? I was sick in my heart, Sophie. But now I'm taking medicine to make my heart better. And when you're better, will you pick me up from school? If Mommy says yes, I'll pick you up from school every day. The call lasted 15 minutes, and when it ended, both Robert and Sophie were crying with happiness. How was... Richard asked. It was like breathing again, Robert replied. I'd forgotten what her voice sounded like. And now? Now I'm sure I want to recover, not just for me, but especially for her. In the following months, Robert dedicated himself intensely to treatment. He attended individual and group therapy, went to AA meetings, and spoke with Sophie on the phone 3 times a week. Robert is progressing very well, Dr. Michael told Richard. He's found a powerful motivation to recover. His daughter. Exactly. Sometimes love for someone else is the fuel we need when self-love isn't enough. And when can he see Sophie in person? I'd say in another 2 weeks he'll be ready. But I suggest a supervised meeting, at least at first. Richard arranged the meeting to take place at the assistance center in their own town, in a controlled but welcoming environment. On the scheduled day, Carla brought Sophie, who was visibly nervous but excited. Grandpa Rich, is my daddy really going to be here? He is, Sophie, and he's very eager to see you. When Robert entered the room, Sophie ran toward him and threw herself into his arms. Daddy, she shouted, hugging him tightly. My princess, Robert whispered, holding her as if he'd never let go. You've grown so much. Daddy, you look different. How so, Sophie? Your eyes are happy again. Robert looked at Richard over Sophie's head, his eyes filled with gratitude. Sophie, Robert said, Daddy wants to apologize. For leaving. It was a wrong decision. I forgive you, Daddy. Grandpa Rich taught me that sometimes people do wrong things when they're sad. And do you want Daddy to come home? Yes, but only if you promise not to leave again. I promise, Sophie, I'll never leave again. Carla, who had watched the reunion in silence, finally stepped forward. Robert, we need to talk about how this will work. I know, Carla, and I want you to know I understand if you don't trust me right away. It's not about trust, Robert. It's about responsibility. Sophie can't go through another abandonment. Carla, Richard interjected, if I may, I'd like to suggest a gradual reunification plan. What kind of plan? Robert continues treatment here for 3 more months but switches to outpatient care. On weekends, he stays with you. Weekdays, supervised visits. And after 3 months, if all goes well, Robert comes home for good but keeps up with therapy. Carla studied Robert carefully. Robert, are you willing to follow this? Plan strictly. Carla, I'm willing to do anything to get my family back. Then let's try. Sophie jumped with joy. Daddy's coming home. Slow down, Sophie, Carla said. First, Daddy needs to show he's really better. Mommy, he is better. Look how happy his eyes are. Richard smiled. Sophie's childlike wisdom had grasped what took adults weeks of therapy to understand. Over the next 3 months, Robert followed the plan diligently. He continued treatment, spent every weekend with his family, and gradually regained Carla's trust. How's he doing? Richard asked Carla. Better than I expected. He's truly committed to change. And Sophie? Sophie's glowing. It's like she's got her spark back. And you, Carla, how do you feel? Cautiously, optimistic. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like we can be a family again. When Robert finally came home for good, Richard was invited to a celebration dinner. Grandpa Rich, Sophie said during the meal, thank you for finding my daddy. Sophie, your daddy was never lost. He just needed help finding his way back. And now he won't get lost again? And now he knows that if he ever feels lost, he can ask for help. Robert stood from the table. Richard, I'd like to say something. Go ahead, Robert. You saved my life, literally. And more than that, you taught me it's possible to start over no matter how far you've fallen. Robert, you saved your own life. I just showed you it was possible. It was more than that. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me strength when I was weak. You gave me a second chance when I thought I didn't deserve one. And what will you do with that second chance? I'll be the best father and husband I can be. And when I'm strong enough, I want to help other veterans like you helped me. Robert, that would be wonderful. Sophie, Robert said, turning to his daughter, Daddy wants to make you a promise. What promise? I promise that whenever I feel sad or lost, I'll talk to you and Mommy instead of leaving. What if you get really sad? Then I'll call Grandpa Rich. Sophie looked at Richard. Grandpa Rich, do you promise to take care of my daddy? I promise, Sophie. And do you promise to take care of him too? I promise. Now we're a family that takes care of each other. Richard smiled. Another family had been reunited. Another child had regained their father. Another veteran had found their way back home. On his way home that night, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey he had lived through in recent years. From a homeless man in the defendant's seat to a respected national coordinator. From a father who had lost his children to a devoted grandfather and a mentor to hundreds of veterans. When he arrived home, he found Sarah waiting for him in the living room. How was dinner, Dad? Emotional. Seeing Robert with his family reunited reminded me of how precious our own reunion was. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Don't you ever get tired of carrying the weight of so many people's stories? Sarah carrying the weight of others' stories is what keeps me strong enough to carry the weight of my own. How so? When I help other veterans reconnect with their families, I relive our own reunion. When I see someone overcoming alcoholism, I remember my own recovery. When I witness forgiveness and reconciliation, I reaffirm the forgiveness I received from you. So helping others is a way of taking care of yourself too. Exactly. And it's a way of honoring all the people who helped me along the way. Sarah hugged her father. Dad, I'm so proud of who you've become. And I'm so proud of who you've always been, Sarah. You never gave up on me, even when I deserved to be given up on. Families don't give up on each other, Dad. Sometimes they get lost for a while, but they never give up. That night, Richard wrote in his personal journal something he had started doing during treatment and kept up to this day. Today, I saw another family reunite. Robert, Carla, and Sophie now have a second chance to be happy together. It reminds me that miracles happen every day, but they usually take a lot of hard work and patience. 10 years ago, I was convinced my life was over, that I had lost everything. That mattered and there was no way back. How wrong I was. Today I have 3 grandchildren who fill me with joy, a daughter who is my best friend and work partner, a son-in-law I treat as my own, and a purpose that makes me wake up every day eager to contribute. Most importantly, I know our story, mine, and Sarah's, is inspiring other families not to give up on each other, that our pain has turned into purpose, our separation into a stronger reunion, our shame into pride. The next day, Richard received an unexpected call from the President of the United States. "Mr. Richard Turner Johnson?" "Yes, Mr. President." "Mr. Johnson, I'd like to invite you to receive the Order of Military Merit in the rank of Grandee Officer, in recognition of your exceptional service to American veterans." Richard was silent for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of the honor. "Mr. President, it's an extraordinary honor, but may I make a request?" "Go ahead." "I'd like other veterans who have been part of the program to also be honored at the same ceremony." "Which veterans?" "Veterans who have recovered and now help others. They are the true heart of the program." "How many people are we talking about?" "I'd nominate 12 veterans representing all regions of the country." "Approved. The ceremony will be in a month in Washington, D.C. When Sarah heard the news, she was moved. "Dad, the highest military honor a civilian can receive." "Sarah, the greatest honor I've ever received was you calling me Dad again. But this is national recognition, Dad, and it's a national responsibility too. Now more people will know about our work and expect results. Dad, you've already transformed the lives of thousands of veterans. What more do they expect you to do? That I keep doing it until I can't anymore? And when you can't do it anymore, then you and all the veterans we've trained will carry on the work." During the week of the ceremony in Washington, D.C., Richard's entire family traveled to be with him. Sarah, Paul, Mary, Charles Edward, and Benedicta, along with representatives from veteran programs across the country. "Is Grandpa going to get a medal from the President?" asked Mary, now 9 years old. "Yes, Mary, a very important medal." "Why is he getting a medal?" "Because he helped many people who were sad and lost. Like he helped you when you were little." "Exactly. And now he teaches others to help their families too." At the ceremony, Richard stood once more in full military uniform, but this time flanked by the 12 veterans he had nominated. Each had their own story of recovery and service to others. "Mr. Richard Turner Johnson," the President announced, "in recognition of your exceptional service to the veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces and for your extraordinary example of personal resilience and dedication to the well-being of your fellow soldiers, I hereby award you the Order of Military Merit in the rank of Grand Officer." When the President pinned the medal to Richard's chest, the entire audience rose in applause. Sarah wept with pride in the front row, holding Benedicta in her lap, while Mary and Charles Edward cheered excitedly. "Mr. Johnson," the President said after the decoration, "would you like to say a few words?" "Oh, yes, Mr. President. This medal isn't mine. It belongs to every veteran who had the courage to ask for help, to every family who never gave up on their loved ones, and to every professional who dedicates their life to caring for those who once cared for our country." "And what is your message for veterans who might be watching?" "That it's never too late to start over. That asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And that every one of you has worth, dignity, and deserves a second chance. And for the families, don't give up. Love is stronger than any hardship, and sometimes, when it feels like we've lost someone forever, we're just in the hardest chapter of the story, not the end." After the ceremony, reporters crowded around Richard for interviews. "Mr. Johnson, how does it feel to be considered a national hero?" "I feel responsible for continuing to honor the trust this country has placed in me." What are your plans for the future? To keep working locally, oversee national programs, and spend as much time as possible with my grandchildren. Do you have any personal projects? I'm writing a third book. This time it's about stories of family reunification. Why that theme? Because I've realized family reunification doesn't just benefit the families involved, it strengthens all of society. Strong families build strong communities. Is there one story that's particularly special to you? They're all special, but recently I helped an 8-year-old girl reunite with her father. Seeing the joy on her face reminds me why I do this work. That evening at the hotel in Washington, D.C., Richard gathered with his family for a private dinner. "Dad," Sarah said, "how do you feel after such an extraordinary day?" "Grateful, Sarah. Grateful to be alive to see this moment. Grateful to have you all by my side. Grateful to have found a purpose greater than myself. And what lesson would you want your grandchildren to take from all this? That no matter how low you fall in life, you can always rise again. That family is the most precious thing we have, and that our responsibility in life is to help others find their own strength." Mary, who had been listening, walked over to her grandfather. "Grandpa, when I grow up, can I work with you?" "Mary, when you grow up, you'll choose your own way to help people. You could be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, or anything else. But I want to help families stay together like you do. Then maybe you'll become a social worker like your mother, or a psychologist, or a family counselor. Can I be a veteran too?" Richard laughed. "Mary, you can be anything you want. What matters is that it makes your heart happy and helps others." Charles Edward, now 4 years old, wanted to join the conversation. "Grandpa, will I get a medal?" "Two?" "Charles Edward, if you work hard to help others, you could earn very important medals." "What kind of medals?" "The most important medal is when someone thanks you for helping. That medal isn't made of metal, it's in your heart. I want a heart medal. Then always be kind to others, help when you can, and never give up on the people you love." Benedicta, still too young to understand, just smiled at her grandfather and babbled her own unintelligible comments. "And you, Benedicta?" Richard said, picking her up. "What will you be when you grow up?" The little girl looked straight into her grandfather's eyes and clearly spoke her first full word. "Help." Everyone at the table was moved. It was as if, even at such a young age, Benedicta had already absorbed the family's core value. "Did you hear that?" Sarah said. "Her first word was help." "That's no coincidence," Paul replied. "This child is growing up in a family where helping others is the heart of everything." "And that's a good thing," Richard said, "because the world will always need people willing to help." On the flight home, Richard reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in recent years. From a man with no prospects to a national example of resilience and service. But more important than public recognition was the personal kind. He had become the father and grandfather he'd always wanted to be, and he'd found a way to turn his pain into purpose. When they arrived home, a surprise was waiting. Robert, Carla, and Sophie stood at the door, along with dozens of other veterans and families Richard had helped over the years. "Surprise!" they all shouted as Richard stepped out of the car. "What's all this?" he asked, genuinely stunned. "A party to celebrate our medal," Robert said. "Because when you receive an honor, all of us you've helped receive it too." "Our medal?" "Yes, Grandpa Rich," Sophie said, "because you taught us we're all one big family." Richard looked around at the dozens of smiling faces. Veterans who had recovered, families reunited, children who had their parents back, wives who had their husbands again. "This," he said, his voice breaking, "is the greatest honor I could ever receive." The party lasted late into the night, with stories shared, children playing, and adults reminiscing about their journeys of healing and reunion. "Richard," said Colonel Matthews, who had traveled just for the occasion, "you've created much more than an assistance program. You've built a community." "Colonel, I just planted a few seeds. These people did the hard work of growing and thriving. And now they're planting their own seeds. That was always the goal, to create a cycle of mutual help. And it worked. There are veterans all over the country who've never met you, but were helped by someone you trained." "Colonel," That's the most rewarding part of this work. Knowing. The impact goes far beyond what I can see. During the party, Richard was handed a special envelope. "What's this?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Let's see." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. "Dear Mr. Richard, my name is Anna Claire Simmons and I am 12 years old. I'm writing this letter because I want you to know how you changed our family. My father was a soldier and became very sad after he left the army. He started drinking and almost left home like Sophie's dad did. But then my mum heard about your program and took my father to talk with one of the veterans you trained, your Robert. Now my father is doing well, doesn't drink anymore, and has become the loving dad I remember. I wanted to thank you because I know that without you, I might have lost my father forever. When I grow up, I want to help families like you did with ours. With much love and gratitude, Anna Claire Simmons P.S. My father said you taught him it's never too late to start. Over. He was right." Richard read the letter aloud to everyone at the party, and when he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "This letter," he said, "sums up everything I've ever wanted to achieve. A little girl who won't lose her father. A family that stayed together. A veteran who recovered. And a new generation learning the importance of helping others." "Dad," said Sarah, "do you realize you've created a legacy that will last for generations?" "Sarah, we created this legacy. Everyone here did. Every person who had the courage to ask for help. Every family that didn't give up. Every professional who dedicated themselves to caring for others. But you were the catalyst, Dad. Your story inspired all the others. And all those other stories inspired mine too. It's a full circle of mutual inspiration." That night, after everyone had left, Richard stood alone on his porch, gazing at the stars. Sarah joined him. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "I'm thinking about Mary Helen, how proud she would be to see all this. She is seeing it, Dad, I'm sure of it. And I'm thinking about Charles Edward, how he could be here with us if I'd been wiser back then. Dad, you can't carry that guilt forever. Charles Edward is present in our work, in how we treat other young veterans in the second chances we give them. You're right, he lives through the good we do in his memory. And through your grandson's name, who will grow up knowing about the brave uncle he honors." Richard looked at Sarah with deep affection. "Sarah, thank you." "For what, Dad?" "For giving me a second chance. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For becoming an extraordinary woman despite all the hardships you faced. Dad, thank you for fighting to come back. For choosing life over despair, for turning your pain into purpose." They stood there in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you could give one piece of advice to someone going through the worst time of their life, what would it be?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "I'd say hold on. Even when it feels like there's no reason to keep going, hold on for one more day. Because life can change in ways you never imagined possible." "And what if the person says they don't have the strength to hold on?" "Then I'd say use my strength. Use the strength of someone who's been through it and survived. You don't have to be strong alone." "And if they have no one?" "Then I'd say, you have me. You have all of us who understand your pain, and you have yourself even if you can't see it right now." Sarah smiled. "Dad, those words will probably save lives." "I hope so, Sarah, I hope so." 2 years after the medal ceremony, Richard published his third book, Families Reunited, Stories of Love, Forgiveness and Second Chances. The book became an instant bestseller and was adopted by family therapists across the country. "Dad," said Sarah during the launch, "this book is different from the others." "How so?" "The others talked about individual overcoming. This one is about collective, family overcoming. It's because I learned that no one recovers alone. We need family, community, a support network. And now you have the biggest support network in the country." "No, Sarah, now we've built the biggest support network in the country, and it's still growing." During the book tour, Richard visited over 40 cities, always meeting veterans and families impacted by his work. In each city, the stories repeated with variations. Fathers who had abandoned their families and later reunited, veterans who had overcome addiction and trauma, children who had forgiven imperfect parents, spouses who had rebuilt marriages. "Mr. Richard," said a woman at an event in Denver, "my husband read your first book while in treatment for alcoholism. It gave him the courage to complete the program." "And how is he now?" "Sober for 2 years and working as a counselor for other alcoholic veterans." "That's wonderful news. And our son, who had cut ties with us because of his father's problems, started visiting again. Now we're a united family once more." "What was the key to that reconciliation?" "Forgiveness. My husband learned to forgive himself, I learned to forgive him, and our son learned to forgive us both. Forgiveness is truly powerful." "Mr. Richard, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you completely forgiven yourself for everything that happened?" Richard thought for a moment. "I'm learning to forgive myself every day. It's an ongoing process, not a one-time event." "And what helps in that process?" "Seeing families like yours come back together. Every reconciliation I witness reminds me that everything I went through was worth it." When Richard returned from the tour, he found a surprise at home. His 3 grandchildren had prepared a special presentation for him. "Grandpa," said Mary, now 11, "we made something for you." "What is it?" "A presentation about our family." Mary, Charles Edward, age 7, and Benedicta, age 3, stood in the living room as if it were a stage. "This is the story of our family," Mary began. "Once upon a time there was a very brave grandpa who was a soldier. And he helped people," added Charles Edward. "Help," said Benedicta, using her favorite word. "But Grandpa got very sad when Grandma Mary Helen got sick," Mary continued. "And he got lost," said Charles Edward. "Lost," repeated Benedicta. "But Mum never gave up looking for Grandpa," said Mary. "And she found him," shouted Charles Edward. "Found," cheered Benedicta. "And now our family helps other families find each other too," Mary concluded. "And we all live happily ever after," the 3 said together. Richard was openly crying when the presentation ended. "That was the most beautiful story I've ever heard," he said, hugging all 3 grandchildren. "Grandpa, is it true you lived on the street?" asked Charles Edward. "It's true, Charles Edward." "And were you sad?" "Very sad." "But are you happy now?" "Now I'm very happy because I have you all." "Grandpa," said Mary, "at school some kids asked if it's true that my grandpa is famous." "What did you say?" "I said you're not famous. You're special." "What's the difference?" "Famous people are on TV. Special people make your heart feel warm." Richard smiled. Mary's wisdom always surprised him. "And does your heart feel warm when you think of Grandpa?" "Warm and bright like the sun. Mine feels warm too when I think of you all." That evening during the family dinner, Paul made an important announcement. "Everyone, Sarah and I have some news." "What news?" asked Richard. "We've decided to have another baby." Richard nearly choked on his food. "Another baby? Another baby," confirmed Sarah, smiling. "But Sarah, don't you think 3 kids are enough already? Dad, we want a big family, and we want our children to grow up understanding that family is about taking care of each other." "And when is the baby due?" asked Mary. "In 7 months," replied Paul. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" Charles Edward wanted to know. "We don't know yet," said Sarah, "but we've already picked out names." "What? Names?" asked Richard. "If it's a boy, he'll be Ferdinand Richard Smith Brown. If it's a girl, she'll be Hope Mary Smith Brown." "Ferdinand?" Richard asked, curious. "In honor of your father, Grandpa Ferdinand, who you always described as a man of character," Sarah explained. "And Hope?" "Because our family is about hope. Hope that we can always start over, hope that love conquers all, hope that it's never too late for things to get better." Richard was moved. "They're perfect names. Grandpa will have 4 grandchildren," cheered Benedicta. 4 grandchildren to love and teach important things," said Richard. "What important things, Grandpa?" asked Charles Edward. "To be kind, to help each other, to never give up on the people they love, and to always believe things can get better." 7 months later, Hope Mary Smith Brown was born. When Richard saw her for the first time, he felt his life was truly complete. "Hi, Hope," he whispered, holding the baby. "You have a very special name." The little girl looked at him with the same alert eyes as all her siblings. "Dad," said Sarah, "now you have 4 grandchildren to spoil." "I won't spoil them. I'll raise them with lots of love and teach them important values and tell them lots of stories about our family and the importance of never giving up." "Dad, sometimes I wonder if you realize the magnitude of what you've built." "What do you mean?" "You have a big, close-knit family, a career that saved thousands of lives, books that inspire people across the country, and national recognition for your contributions." "Sarah, I have much more than that." "Like what?" "I have peace. Peace with myself, peace with my past, peace with my future." "And how did you find that peace?" "By learning that my worth doesn't depend on my past mistakes, but on my present choices, and by choosing every day to be better than I was yesterday." 2 years later, when Hope was already walking and saying her first words, Richard received a special call. "Sergeant Richard, this is Colonel Armstrong again." "Yes, Colonel." "Sergeant, the military is creating a special medal, the Exemplary Veteran Medal. It will be awarded annually to veterans who've distinguished themselves in community service after leaving active duty." "That's an excellent idea, Colonel, and we'd like you to be the first recipient and also the chairman of the selection committee for future honorees." "Colonel, it would be an honor, but may I suggest that the first ceremony honors not just me, but several exemplary veterans at once?" "How many are you thinking?" "How about 20 veterans representing all regions of the country and different types of community service?" "Approved. The ceremony will be in 6 months." Richard immediately began working on selecting the other 19 veterans to be honored. He carefully chose people who represented different aspects of community service. Veterans working in education, healthcare, social assistance, the environment, and other fields. "Dad," said Sarah when she heard about the selection, "did you include Robert on the list?" "And I did. He became one of our best counselors, and his family reunification story is inspiring." "And what other kinds of stories did you select?" "A veteran who started a free school for underprivileged children, a veteran who developed a sustainable farming program for rural families, a veteran who runs a support center for women victims of violence." "Very different stories from yours." "Exactly. I want to show there are many ways to serve the community after military service." "And what's the common thread among all of them?" "They all turned their experiences, good and bad, into ways to help others." At the Exemplary Veteran Medal ceremony, Richard was honored again, but this time sharing the stage with 19 other exceptional veterans. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the Army commander, "today we honor 20 veterans who prove that service to our country doesn't end when we hang up the uniform." One by one, the veterans were called to the stage, each with their own unique story of resilience and service. When it was Robert's turn, Sophie was in the audience, proudly applauding. "Robert Simmons," announced the commander, "for his exceptional dedication to family reunification and recovery efforts for vulnerable veterans." Robert stepped onto the stage, visibly moved. "How does it feel to be recognized nationally?" asked a journalist after the ceremony. "I feel grateful," Robert replied. "Grateful to Sergeant Richard, who showed me it was possible to start over. Grateful to my family, who forgave me. And grateful to all the veterans I've had the privilege to help." "What's your message to other veterans who may be struggling?" "Seek help. Don't be ashamed to admit you need support. And know, there are people who understand your pain and want to help." "Is your work inspired by Sergeant Richard's story?" "Absolutely. He saved me, and now I try to save others the same way he saved me." After the ceremony, all the honored veterans gathered for a dinner. Richard looked around the table and saw 20 people who had turned their lives into instruments of service for others. "Everyone," he said, "I'd like to propose an idea." "What idea?" asked one of the veterans. "Let's create a formal network of exemplary veterans, a group that meets yearly to share experiences and coordinate efforts." "How would it work?" asked another veteran. "Each of us works in our own region and specialty, but we stay in regular contact. If someone has a case outside their expertise, they can refer it to another network member." "How would this help veterans in need?" "They'd have access to a national support network, not just local programs. "Richard," said Robert, "you're proposing to expand the idea of veterans helping veterans to a national level." "Exactly. And involving different kinds of support. Psychological, social, professional, family, educational. The idea was unanimously approved, and the National Network of Exemplary Veterans was born. When Richard returned home after the ceremony, he found his 4 grandchildren waiting for him with a surprise. "Hi, Grandpa," they all shouted in unison as he walked in. "What's this surprise?" "We made a book about you," said Mary, now 13. "A book? A book of stories, you told us," explained Charles Edward, now 9. "With drawings," added Benedicta, now 5. "Book," said Hope, now 2, trying to pronounce the word. Mary presented a handmade notebook with a colorful cover drawn by all 4 children. "The title is Stories from Grandpa Rich," said Mary. "And we wrote down the stories you told us," said Charles Edward. "Can I see?" Richard opened the book and saw page after page handwritten by Mary, with drawings made by the other children. There was the story of how he first met Sarah when she was a baby, the story of how he learned to be a soldier, the story of how he reunited with Sarah in court. "My favorite story," said Benedicta, pointing to one of the pages, "is when Grandpa Rich taught Sophie's dad how to come home." "And mine," said Charles Edward, "is when Grandpa got a medal from the president." "Mine," said Mary, "is when Grandpa—" And Mom hugged again after so long. "And what's yours, Hope?" asked Richard. "All of them," the little girl replied with a smile. Richard spent the whole night reading the book made by his grandchildren. Every page was a memory, every drawing an expression of childish love. "Sarah," he said when she came to check on him, "your children have given me the most precious gift." "What is it, Dad?" "Yes, the certainty that our story will keep being told to future generations. Dad, do you realize you've created a family legacy beyond your professional one?" "How so?" "Your grandchildren are growing up with strong values. Mary already said she wants to study psychology to help families. Charles Edward wants to be a soldier like his grandfather. Benedicta wants to be a social worker like her mum. And Hope is still very young, but she already shows extraordinary empathy for her age. They're all going to make a difference in the world, because they learned from you that making a difference is what gives life meaning." A few months later, Richard decided it was time for a final transition in his career. "Sarah," he said during a family gathering, "I've made an important decision." "What decision, Dad?" "I'm officially retiring from all administrative roles. I want to spend the last productive years of my life focusing only on direct service and time with family." "Dad, are you sure? Administrative work lets you impact so many more people." "Sarah, there's now a solid network of trained people doing that work. I want to go back to the basics, talking directly to veterans and families who need help." "And how would this transition work?" "You'd officially take over all my administrative responsibilities. I'd keep just a small office for individual consultations." "Dad, that's a huge responsibility." "Sarah, you've been doing the work for years. The change would just be official." "What if I can't maintain the same standard of quality?" "Sarah, you've already surpassed the standard I set. It's time for you to lead and for me to support." The transition took 6 months to complete. When it was finalized, Richard kept only a small office where he saw 3 veterans a week, plus special cases that required his specific expertise. "How does it feel to be officially retired from administrative duties?" asked Paul. "Free," Richard replied. "Free to just be grandpa and a counselor." "And you don't miss the bigger responsibility?" "Paul, my biggest responsibility now is raising my grandchildren and being available for the most complex cases that come up." "And what are the most complex cases?" "Situations where whole families have fallen apart, veterans with severe trauma, cases that need years of follow-up." "Do you have the patience for cases that take years?" "I have all the patience in the world. After all, my own case took decades to resolve." On his 75th birthday, Richard was surprised with a party organized by his grandchildren, attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. "Grandpa," said Mary, now 15, "we organized something special for your birthday." "What is it?" "A presentation with stories from people you've helped." During the celebration, Over 20 people took the microphone to share how Richard had impacted their lives. Robert and his family, veterans who had recovered, children who had reconciled with their veteran parents, therapists who had learned his methods. "Sergeant Richard," said a young veteran, "you taught me that asking for help is a sign of courage, not weakness." "Mr. Richard," said a wife, "you helped me not give up on my husband when everything seemed lost." "Grandpa Rich," said a child, "you brought my daddy back home." One by one, the testimonies created a striking mosaic of transformed lives. "How do you feel hearing all this?" asked Sarah. "I feel blessed," Richard replied, "and responsible for continuing to honor the trust all these people have placed in me." "Dad, how many lives do you think you've directly touched over the years?" "Directly, maybe a few hundred, but indirectly, through the people I've trained who carried on the work, probably thousands." "And how do you want to be remembered?" "As a man who fell very low, but had the courage to accept help to get back up, and who used his second chance to help others have their own second chances. That's a beautiful definition of a legacy." "Sarah, the real legacy isn't in what I've done, but in what all these people will do from now on." "What do you mean?" "Every veteran I've helped will help others. Every family I've reunited will teach the importance of family unity. Every child who grew up seeing these values will pass them on to their own children. It's an endless multiplication of good." Exactly, that's how the world improves. One person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. That night, after all the guests had left, Richard sat on the porch with his 4 grandchildren. "Grandpa," said Charles Edward, now 11, "are you the most important person in the world?" "No, Charles Edward. I'm just an ordinary person who had extraordinary opportunities to help others. But everyone says you're a hero. Charles Edward, a hero isn't someone who never falls. A hero is someone who gets back up after falling and helps others do the same. So all of us can be heroes. All of you can be heroes. Every time you help someone, every time you don't give up on someone you love, every time you choose to do good instead of harm." "Grandpa," said Benedicta, now 7, "will you always take care of us?" "Benedicta, I'll take care of you as long as I'm alive, and when I'm no longer here, you'll take care of each other. And when we get old?" "When you get old, you'll teach these same things to your own grandchildren." "What things?" Yes, asked Hope, now 4. "That family is the most important thing in the world, that we should always help people who are sad, and that we should never give up on someone we love, even if they do wrong things?" asked Mary. "Especially if they do wrong things. That's when they need our love the most." "Like Mum didn't give up on you?" said Charles Edward. "Exactly. And like I don't give up on any veteran I work with, even when they think they don't deserve help." "Grandpa," said Benedicta, "I want to be just like you when I grow up." "Benedicta, you don't need to be just like me. You need to be yourself, but the best version of yourself." "How?" "By being kind, being brave, being someone who helps others, and always remembering that our family loves each other no matter what." Hope, who had been quietly listening, moved closer to her grandfather and said, "Grandpa, I love you more than the stars, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." In the following years, Richard gradually reduced his professional activities to dedicate himself more fully to his family. He picked up his grandchildren from school, helped with homework, attended school performances, and told stories every night. "Dad," Sarah said when he turned 78, "don't you feel lost without the intense work?" "No, Sarah. I feel like I've finally found the right balance between purpose and family." "And don't you miss the public recognition?" "The recognition I get from my grandchildren every day is worth more than any medal." "What about the veterans who still need help?" "Sarah, there's a strong network of people handling that. My time is now better spent educating the next generation, the grandchildren. The grandchildren and all the children they'll influence throughout their lives." One day, when Richard was 80, he received a special visit. Sophie, now a young woman of 20, came accompanied by a young man. "Grandpa Rich," she said, "I'd like you to meet my boyfriend, Peter." "Nice to meet you, Peter." "Mr. Johnson, the honor is mine. Sophie told me the whole story of how you helped reunite our family." "Our family?" "Yes, sir. My father is also a veteran and went through struggles similar to Sophie's dad. When I heard your story from her, he Sought help. And how is he now? Doing well, sir. Sober for 3 years and working as a counselor for other veterans. That's wonderful news. Sophie and I want to do something special, Peter said. What is it? Create a student organization for veterans' children so they have support and community while their parents recover. That's an excellent idea. Do you want my help setting it up? We want your blessing, Sophie said, and we'd like to name the organization in your honor. Richard was moved. Sophie, it would be an extraordinary honor. Then it'll be the Richard Johnson Institute for Veterans Children. And what will be the main focus? Emotional support, academic tutoring, and education about military service and reintegration into civilian life. Peter, do you have experience with these issues? I do, sir. I was a child who almost lost my father to post-service struggles. And now you want to help other kids in the same situation. Exactly. We want to create a support network for the next generation. Richard smiled. The cycle of help was expanding to a new generation. You have my full blessing and support. 2 years later, the Richard Johnson Institute for Veterans Children was operating in 5 cities, serving over 200 children and teens. Grandpa Rich, Sophie said during a visit. The Institute is making a real difference in these kids' lives. Tell me about some cases. There's a 12-year-old girl whose father was battling severe depression. Through our program, she learned to understand that her father's illness wasn't her fault. And how is she now? Much better. And her father sought treatment after seeing how his daughter was being helped. What else? There's a 16-year-old boy who was struggling in school because his father had attempted suicide. Through tutoring and emotional support, he managed to recover academically. And the father? He also got help and is now working with Peter in the counseling program. Sophie, you're creating a virtuous cycle. We learned from you that helping one person plants a seed that can grow into a forest. When Richard turned 82, his 4 grandchildren, now young adults, organized a special surprise. Grandpa, said Mary, now 23 and a psychology graduate, we have a special gift for you. What is it? The 4 of us have decided to pursue careers related to the work you've done. What do you mean? I graduated in psychology and will specialize in family therapy, said Mary. I graduated in social work and will work with veterans, said Charles Edward, now 19. I'm going to study law to work with families in reconciliation, said Benedicta, now 15. And I'm going to study medicine to care for people with broken hearts, said Hope, 12 years old. Richard was completely moved. Did you make these choices because of Grandpa? We made these choices because we grew up seeing that helping others is what makes life worthwhile, Mary replied. And because we want to continue our family's work, added Charles Edward. Each in our own way, said Benedicta, but all together. Hope finished. My dear grandchildren, said Richard, hugging all 4. You've given me the greatest gift I could ever receive. What gift? Asked Hope. The certainty that the work will continue, not because you have to, but because you chose. That night, Richard wrote in his journal, Today I discovered that a lifetime of work was not in vain. My 4 grandchildren, raised with the values of family, service, and compassion, have chosen to dedicate their professional lives to helping others. This means that 30, 40 years from now, when I'm no longer here, there will be 4 people spreading the same values I tried to teach, and if they pass these values to their own children, and those to theirs, and so on, perhaps I've planted seeds that will grow for generations. I can't imagine a more beautiful legacy than this. At 85, Richard decided to write his final book, Letters to My Grandchildren, Lessons from a Life Well Lived. Dad, said Sarah, why final book? Because this book contains everything I want my grandchildren to remember me by when I'm gone. Dad, don't talk like that. Sarah, I'm 85. It's natural for me to think about it. And what lessons do you want to leave? Lessons about love, forgiveness, perseverance, family, serving others, and how to turn pain into purpose. Will it be an autobiography? No, it'll be a book of practical advice for facing life's challenges, based on your experience. Based on the experiences of all the veterans and families I've met over the years. The book took 2 years to complete, and was published when Richard was 87. "Grandpa," said Hope, now 14, "I read your whole book." "And what did you think?" "I think it's an instruction manual for being a good person." "That's exactly it, Hope. My favorite part is where you write about forgiving people who've done wrong." "Why is that your favorite?" "Because it's the hardest, but also the most important." "You understood perfectly, my dear." "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Always. If someone does something really bad to me, how will I ever forgive them?" "Hope you'll remember that forgiving isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let what happened keep hurting you. And if I can't, then you'll ask for help to do it, just like I asked for help to forgive myself, and you all helped me forgive. Family helps family. Always, Hope. Always." On his 90th birthday, Richard was surrounded by a family that had grown exponentially. Sarah and Paul, the 4 grandchildren, plus 3 married grandchildren who now had young children, totaling 7 great-grandchildren. Grandpa. "Richard," said one of the great-granddaughters, a 5-year-old named Helen, "are you very old?" "I'm very old, yes, Helen." "But you still play with us? Because playing with you makes me feel young again." "Grandpa, will you be old forever?" "Helen, one day Grandpa won't be here anymore, but the love I feel for you all will remain forever." "Where will it stay?" "In each of your hearts, and when you have your own children, you'll pass that love on to them." "Is it like an inheritance?" "It's exactly like an inheritance, the most valuable one there is." During the 90th birthday celebration, Richard gave a special speech. "My dear family," he began, "today I turn 90 after a life filled with many chapters. Difficult chapters, when I lost your grandmother, Mary Helen, and drifted away from you. Desperate chapters, when I lived on the streets without hope. Chapters of redemption, when Sarah found me and gave me a second chance. And chapters of purpose, when I discovered my pain could be turned into a tool to help others. But the happiest chapters of my life are these: watching you grow, seeing our family expand, and witnessing our values passed on to a new generation. My message to you today is simple. Never give up on each other. Family is the most precious thing we have in this world. And always remember, each of you has the power to make a difference in someone else's life. Use that power with wisdom and love." At 93, Richard began to feel his time was coming to an end. He called each of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren for special private conversations. "Mary," he said to his eldest granddaughter, now a renowned psychologist, "you've become everything I hoped for and more. Thank you, Grandpa, for all your teachings. Mary, keep helping. Families reunite. It's sacred work." "I will, Grandpa, I promise. And teach your children the importance of compassion and forgiveness. They're already learning, Grandpa, just like we learned from you." To Charles Edward, now a respected social worker. "Charles, Edward, you honor your uncle's name every day with the work you do. Grandpa, I always think of him when I help young veterans. Keep thinking of him. And remember, saving one life is saving the whole world." To Benedicta, now a family law attorney. "Benedicta, your specialization is perfect for our family's mission." "Thank you, Grandpa. Every family I help legally reunite reminds me of our own reunion. And keep fighting for the rights of vulnerable families." To Hope, now a doctor specializing in mental health. "Hope, your name has always been prophetic. You bring hope wherever you go. I learned from you, Grandpa, that healing isn't just treating symptoms, it's restoring hope." "Exactly. And remember, the most difficult patients are the ones who need the most patience and love." In December, as Richard approached his 94th birthday, he gathered the whole family for one final important talk. "My dear family," he said, visibly frail but still clear-minded, "the time has come for us to say goodbye." "Grandpa, don't talk like that," Sarah said, crying. "Sarah, my dear, I'm at peace. I've lived a full life, watched our family grow and thrive, and I know the work will continue through all of you." "Grandpa," Mary asked, "what do you most want us to remember about you?" "I want you to remember that love is stronger than any hardship, that family is sacred, and that we all have a responsibility to help those in need." "What about your work with veterans?" Charles Edward asked. "That work isn't mine, It's ours, all of ours, every veteran we've helped, every family reunited. It's a collective legacy. Grandpa, Benedicta said, what was the most important lesson of your life? That it's never too late to start over, and sometimes hitting rock bottom is necessary to find solid ground. And for us, what's your final guidance? Hope asked. Take care of each other. Honor our family with your choices, and always help those in need. Richard looked at his 7 great-grandchildren, who watched him with wide, serious eyes. And you, my little treasures, grow up knowing you are deeply loved and that you have the responsibility to spread that love throughout the world. A week later, on the eve of his 94th birthday, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family. The funeral was a celebration of the extraordinary life he had lived. Thousands attended, veterans he had helped, families reunited through his work, children who grew up reading his books, politicians who implemented his policies. Today we say goodbye not just to a national hero, said Sarah during the eulogy, but to an extraordinary father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, who taught us that true success in life is measured by how much love we give and how much good we do. My father fell very low but rose higher than he had ever been, and he taught us that we can all do the same. His legacy isn't in the medals he received or the books he wrote. It's in every reunited family, every veteran who found recovery, every child who grew up knowing they must help others. And it lives most of all in us, his family, who will continue spreading his values and teachings to future generations. After the funeral, the family gathered to read a letter Richard had left to be opened after his passing. My dear family, if you're reading this, it means my earthly journey has ended, but our journey as a family is eternal. I want you to know I died happy to have lived long enough to see each of you become extraordinary people, happy to witness our family grow and strengthen, happy to have turned my pain into purpose. Sarah, my beloved daughter, thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for giving me wonderful grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Keep being the strong, compassionate leader you've always been. Mary, Charles Edward, Benedicta, and Hope, my dear grandchildren, you are my greatest pride. Look how you've grown into admirable adults who dedicate your lives to helping others. Continue this work. My precious great-grandchildren, grow up knowing you are part of a special family. A family that believes in the power of love, forgiveness, and service to others. I ask just one thing: take care of each other. When someone in our family faces hardship, remember my story. Remember it's never too late to start over, and that no one has to face challenges alone. And keep helping others. Every veteran you assist, every family you reunite, every life you change will honor our history and uphold our values. Don't weep for me. Celebrate the extraordinary life we built together. And know that wherever I am, I will be proud of each of you. With all my eternal love, Grandpa Rich, Dad. A year after Richard's passing, the family established the Richard Johnson Institute, an organization that consolidated all the programs he had created throughout his life. Sarah became its president, with each grandchild taking on specific responsibilities. Dad, Sarah said, visiting Richard's grave on the first anniversary of his passing, the work continues. We've already helped over 500 families this year, and the children are growing up with the same values you taught us. They know they're part of something greater. Your story still inspires people across the country. Schools use your books, therapists apply your methods, families reconcile following your example. Most importantly, our family remains united and strong. We support each other, just like you taught us. Thank you, Dad, for fighting to come back to us. Thank you for turning your pain into light. Thank you for teaching us that love is stronger than any adversity. Keep watching over us from above. And know that your legacy will live on forever through every life we touch and every family we help reunite. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your heartfelt words in the comments. Do you think Richard made the right decisions throughout his journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this extraordinary transformation of a man who hit rock bottom, but managed to rise again and help thousands of others. Thank you so much for being here with us. Don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories of resilience and hope.